Welcome to the Crime for Sleep channel. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Story 1. The evening shadows stretched long across the gravel driveway as Martin and Claire Harmon carried the last of their belongings into the Victorian home on Maple Street. The house, with its weathered brick exterior and ornate trim, stood proud against the darkening sky, seeming to watch their every move with its large bay windows. 3 stories of architectural splendor from an era long past, now theirs for a price that had seemed too reasonable for such a historic property. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, a gentle protest from the aged wood that had supported generations before them. Claire had already begun unpacking boxes in the kitchen, the sound of ceramic dishes being carefully placed on wooden shelves echoing through the high-ceilinged rooms. Martin stood in the center of what would be their living room, surrounded by stacked moving boxes and draped furniture, taking in the intricate crown molding and the ornate fireplace that dominated the far wall. The realtor had mentioned the house was built in 1897 by a prominent local judge, though she'd been unusually vague about the subsequent owners. "Can you feel it?" Claire called from the kitchen, her voice carrying through the empty spaces with a slight reverberation. "It's like the house is breathing with us." Martin smiled, running his fingers along the mahogany banister of the staircase. "It's got character, that's for sure." He paused, looking up the stairs toward the shadowy second floor. "Hello," he called out playfully, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Anyone home besides us?" The words hung in the air for a moment, the house seemingly absorbing them into its walls. Then, unmistakably from somewhere above them, a whispered response drifted down the stairwell. "Come in." Claire appeared in the doorway, a dinner plate still in her hand. "Did you say something?" Martin stood frozen, his hand still on the banister. "I thought I heard." He shook his head. "It's nothing, just the house settling." Detective Elaine Foster flipped through the case file 3 weeks later, the thin pages making a soft, rhythmic sound against her fingertips. The overhead light in the precinct buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows across the document spread before her. Outside, rain tapped against the windows with gentle persistence, creating a soothing backdrop to her late-night review. The Harmon case had landed on her desk that morning, passed along by a patrol officer who'd responded to a neighbor's call about unusual activity at the house on Maple Street. The report was thin on details. The Harmons hadn't been seen for several days, mail was piling up, and lights remained on at all hours. Nothing conclusive, but enough to warrant a wellness check that had yielded troubling results. "No signs of forced entry," Detective Foster murmured to herself, noting the officer's report. "No evidence of struggle, just emptiness." The house had been found immaculately clean, beds made, dishes put away. The Harmons' vehicles remained in the garage, their cell phones charging on bedside tables. Their wallets, keys, and identification were all present. It was as if they had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routine, leaving no trace of where they had gone or why. Foster picked up a small evidence bag containing a journal found on Claire Harmon's desk. The last entry had been made 3 days before their disappearance. "It spoke again last night. Martin doesn't believe me, says it's just the old pipes or the wind, but I know what I heard. It's getting louder now, more distinct. It knows our names." Detective Foster placed the journal back on her desk, a cool sensation crawling up her spine despite the warmth of the precinct. She reached for her coffee, finding it had gone cold during her review. The clock on the wall showed just past midnight, the hands moving with silent precision in the quiet room. The next morning, Foster parked her sedan in front of the Harmon residence. In daylight, the house appeared welcoming, almost charming, with its freshly painted shutters and well-maintained garden. Birds sang from the branches of an ancient oak that towered over the side yard. Nothing about the exterior suggested the mystery that lay within. As she approached the front door, keys in hand, the neighbor who had made the initial call stepped out from the adjacent property. Eleanor Winters, a woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, made her way carefully across the lawn toward Detective Foster. "Finding anything?" Mrs. Winters asked, her voice carrying the slight raspiness of age. Foster shook her head. "Not yet. I understand you were the one who reported the Harmons missing." Mrs. Winters nodded, her eyes drifting up to the third-floor windows of the house. They seemed like such a nice couple, so excited to move in. She paused, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I tried to warn them, you know." "Warn them about what, Mrs. Winters?" "This house has a history, Detective. People don't tend to stay long." She gestured toward the structure with a slightly trembling hand. "The Millers before them only lasted 6 months. The Pattersons before that just under a year. All of them left suddenly. No goodbyes, no forwarding addresses." Foster studied the older woman's face, looking for signs of exaggeration or imagination. She found only genuine concern. "Did any of the previous owners mention unusual experiences in the house?" Mrs. Winters' gaze dropped to the ground. They didn't have to, you could see it in their faces. The way they'd check over their shoulders when they were in the yard, how the lights would stay on all night. She looked back up at Foster, and there were the whispers. Whispers. Like someone was always having a conversation just out of earshot. I'd see them, the Harmons, the Millers, all of them standing still sometimes, heads tilted like they were listening to someone, but there was never anyone else there. Detective Foster thanked Mrs. Winters for her insights and continued into the house, the key turning smoothly in the lock. The interior was still and silent, afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains to create intricate patterns on the hardwood floors. She moved methodically through each room, noting details that hadn't been captured in the initial report. In the study, a half-finished cup of tea sat on the desk, a thin film formed on its surface. A book lay open beside it, a mystery novel with the page corner folded down. In the kitchen, fruit in a bowl was just beginning to soften, suggesting the Harmons had been gone for the time frame indicated. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. As Foster climbed the stairs to the second floor, she ran her hand along the same banister Martin Harmon had touched on their first night. The wood felt unusually warm beneath her fingers, despite the coolness of the house. She paused, listening to the settling sounds of the old structure, the subtle creaks and sighs that all historic buildings seem to make. The master bedroom was as pristine as the rest of the house, the bed made with hospital corners, decorative pillows arranged just so. On Claire's nightstand sat a voice recorder, its presence an unexpected detail in the otherwise ordinary room. Foster pressed play, her heartbeat quickening slightly as static filled the silence, followed by Claire's voice. "Night 3 in the house. I've been hearing it more clearly now. Martin thinks I'm imagining things, but I'm going to prove it tonight." Silence followed for nearly a minute. Foster was about to press stop when a faint sound came through the recorder, a whisper so low she had to bring the device closer to her ear. "Claire, Martin, we've been waiting for you." The voice wasn't Claire's or Martin's. It had a strange, hollow quality, as if speaking through water or from a great distance. Then Claire's voice returned, trembling slightly. Who are you? What do you want? The response came immediately, louder this time. Come to the attic, see for yourselves. The recording ended abruptly. Foster set down the recorder, her professional detachment momentarily shaken. She took a deep breath, centering herself before continuing her investigation. The attic would be her next stop. The narrow stairs to the third floor creaked beneath her weight, announcing her ascent to the empty house. The air grew noticeably colder as she reached the top, her breath forming small clouds in front of her face despite the warm spring day outside. The attic door stood slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible through the gap. Foster pushed it open slowly, her flashlight illuminating a space that differed dramatically from the well-kept rooms below. Here, dust covered the floorboards and cobwebs stretched between exposed rafters. Old furniture draped in yellowed sheets created strange, humanoid shapes in the dim light. At the far end, a small round window allowed a weak shaft of sunlight to penetrate the gloom. In the center of the attic floor, the dust had been disturbed in a perfect circle about 6 feet in diameter. Foster approached cautiously, her flashlight beam revealing that within the circle, the wooden floorboards appeared newer than those surrounding it, lighter in color, free from the wear visible elsewhere. She knelt beside this anomaly, running her fingers along the edge of the circle. The difference in wood was subtle but unmistakable. It had been replaced, and relatively recently. As her knuckles rapped lightly against the surface, a hollow sound echoed back, noticeably different from the solid thud produced by the surrounding floor. Foster stood and stepped back, surveying the entire attic with new awareness. The house had a secret, one that might explain the Harmons' disappearance and perhaps the fate of previous residents as well. 3 days later, as workers carefully removed the circular section of flooring in the attic, Detective Foster stood watching, her notepad in hand. The hollow space beneath contained a small metal box, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift under direct observation. Inside the box, they found a stack of photographs, each showing different families standing proudly in front of the house on Maple Street. The Harmons were in the most recent photo, their smiles frozen in time, unaware of what awaited them. On the back of each photograph was written the same message in different handwriting. The house has answered. We have joined the others. No bodies were ever found, despite an extensive search of the property and surrounding areas. The case of Martin and Claire Harmon joined a growing file of similar disappearances linked to the house on Maple Street, a file that would remain open on Detective Foster's desk for years to come. The house still stands today, its windows dark, its doors locked. Sometimes, late at night, neighbors report seeing lights moving from room to room, as if someone is walking through with a candle. And occasionally, if you listen carefully while passing by, you might hear a faint whisper carried on the breeze. Come in, we've been waiting for you. Story 2. The afternoon light filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting long shadows across Emma Walker's newly rented apartment. Dust particles danced in the slanted beams, suspended in time like the quietness that enveloped the space. It was her third week in Unit 4B of the Elmwood Apartments, a pre-war building tucked away on a tree-lined street in Ridgeville. The rent was surprisingly affordable for such a well-maintained space in this part of town, a fact that Emma had initially attributed to good fortune. The soft hum of the refrigerator provided a steady backdrop as Emma stood in the center of her kitchen, staring at the open tube of toothpaste on the bathroom counter visible through the doorway. She hadn't left it like that. Emma always squeezed from the bottom, a habit instilled by her methodical father. This tube was unmistakably compressed from the middle, the white paste slightly crusted around the opening. It wasn't the first irregularity she had noticed. 2 days ago, the level of milk in her refrigerator seemed lower than she remembered. Yesterday, her favorite mug had been moved from its usual spot on the top shelf to the middle one. Small discrepancies that could be explained away by fatigue or forgetfulness, at least that's what Emma had been telling herself. The hardwood floor creaked beneath her feet as she moved toward the bathroom, the sound amplified in the stillness of the apartment. Emma picked up the toothpaste, examining it as if it might provide answers to the unease that had been gradually building within her. The tube felt cool against her fingers, its weight slightly less than it should have been for a recently purchased item. Her cell phone's ring shattered the silence, causing her to flinch. The caller ID displayed Elmwood Management. Emma answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Ms. Walker, this is Harold Bentley, the property manager. Just checking in to see how you're settling into the apartment." Emma's fingers tightened around the phone. "It's nice, but I've been noticing some strange things, like my things being moved, food disappearing." There was a pause on the line, a beat too long to be comfortable. "Mr. Bentley." Ms. Walker, his voice had dropped to a near whisper. "No one else has lived there since the last tenant went missing." The words hung in the air, stealing the warmth from the sunlit room. Emma's gaze drifted to the ceiling vent above the shower, where she noticed, for the first time, that one of the screws was missing. Detective Liam Carver sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his tired face in the dimly lit precinct. It was past midnight, but sleep remained elusive as it had for the 6 months since Melissa Chen's disappearance. The case file lay open before him, the pages dog-eared from countless reviews. Melissa had vanished from apartment 4B at the Elmwood without a trace, no forced entry, no signs of struggle, no withdrawal from her bank account. It was as if she had simply stepped out of existence, leaving behind a half-empty cup of tea and a novel splayed open on her nightstand. The soft click of a pen punctuated the silence as Carver made another note in his already crowded notepad. His partner, Detective Sarah Reeves, approached with 2 cups of coffee, setting one down beside him. The ceramic made a dull thud against the wooden desk. "You're still on the Chen case," she observed, not a question, but a statement tinged with concern. "Something isn't adding up," Carver replied, his fingers tracing the edge of a photograph showing Melissa's apartment. The landlord rented it out again, to a woman named Emma Walker. "Already, that seems." "Premature," Carver finished, taking a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and burnt, but he welcomed the warmth. "I'm going to talk to her tomorrow." The following morning, a light drizzle veiled the city as Carver parked his sedan outside the Elmwood. The building's brick facade was darkened by the rain, the ornate cornices casting deep shadows beneath them. He made his way to apartment 4B, the weight of the case files in his briefcase matching the heaviness in his chest. Emma Walker opened the door after the second knock, her eyes ringed with the unmistakable shadow of a sleepless night. She invited him in without hesitation, eager, he noted, for a presence other than her own in the apartment. "I've been hearing things," she confided as they sat at her small dining table. "Footsteps when there shouldn't be any, and I keep finding things moved." Carver nodded, his experienced gaze scanning the apartment. It looked different from the photos in Melissa's file, new furniture, different curtains, but the layout remained unchanged. The ceiling vent above the shower caught his attention. It was now firmly secured with all screws in place. "Did the property manager mention anything about the previous tenant when you signed the lease?" he asked, returning his attention to Emma. She shook her head. "Not until yesterday. He said she went missing. I looked her up online after his call." Melissa Chen, right, there wasn't much information. "We've been investigating her disappearance for 6 months, Carver acknowledged, withdrawing a photograph from his briefcase. It showed Melissa, a young woman with shoulder-length black hair and a tentative smile, standing in this very apartment. "Did you notice anything unusual when you first moved in? Any repairs being done? Any areas that seemed recently disturbed?" Emma's brow furrowed as she considered the question. "The bathroom ceiling had been repainted. I remember because there were paint specks on the shower curtain rod." Her voice lowered. "And there's something else. The first night I stayed here, I dreamt someone was watching me sleep. When I woke up, my bedroom door was open, though I'm certain I closed it before going to bed." Carver made a note, the scratch of his pen against paper loud in the quiet apartment. "I'd like to take another look at the apartment, if you don't mind." With Emma's permission, Carver began a methodical examination of the space. The kitchen cabinets revealed nothing unusual. The living room, with its second-hand furniture and sparse decorations, offered no insights. It was in the bathroom, standing on the edge of the tub to examine the recently painted ceiling vent, that he noticed a slight discoloration on one edge of the vent cover. "Do you have a screwdriver?" he asked Emma, who had been silently observing from the doorway. She returned with a small toolkit, watching as Carver carefully removed the vent cover. His flashlight beam revealed the metal ductwork beyond and something else, a faint glimmer that didn't belong. Using a pair of tweezers from his pocket, Carver extracted a small silver earring from where it had been lodged in the duct. He recognized it immediately as matching the pair Melissa Chen had been wearing in the last security camera footage before her disappearance. The building plans showed these vents connect to a maintenance shaft that runs between apartments, Carver said quietly, holding the earring up to the light. "I need to speak with your landlord immediately." Harold Bentley's office was located in the basement of the building, a cluttered space filled with filing cabinets and maintenance equipment. The property manager's usual affable demeanor had been replaced with nervous tension as Carver confronted him with the earring. "I don't know anything about that," Bentley insisted, his fingers drumming an erratic pattern on his desk. "The previous tenant, Ms. Chen, she just stopped paying rent. We waited the legal period, then cleared out the apartment." "And the maintenance shaft behind the bathroom vent," Carver pressed. "Who has access to that?" Bentley's eyes flickered briefly to a ring of keys hanging on a hook by the door. "Just maintenance staff, and myself, of course." "And where does that shaft lead?" The property manager's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "It connects several apartments for ventilation. There's also access to a small storage area above the 5th floor." Within an hour, Carver had obtained a search warrant. With a team of officers, he accessed the storage space. Bentley had mentioned a low-ceilinged attic that stretched across much of the building's top level. The beam of his flashlight cut through years of accumulated dust, eventually settling on an area toward the back where the dust had been disturbed. What they found there explained the disappearance of Melissa Chen and the disturbances Emma Walker had experienced. A crude living space had been established in the attic, a mattress, some bottled water, packages of food, and a collection of small items. A hairbrush with long dark strands, a woman's watch, a dog-eared photograph. Most disturbing was a notebook filled with meticulous observations of apartment 4B and its occupants, dating back more than a year. The most recent entry had been made just yesterday. New girl notices too much, had to replace vent screws, getting harder to come down at night. The investigation revealed that Jason Merrick, hired as a maintenance worker 6 months before Melissa's disappearance, had been living undetected in the building's hidden spaces. He had created a network of access points through the ventilation system, allowing him to enter apartments unnoticed. Melissa Chen had not simply disappeared, she had been abducted after discovering his intrusions. Her body later found buried in a remote wooded area based on information in Merrick's notebook. For Detective Carver, the case brought resolution but little comfort. As he watched the forensic team process the attic space, he couldn't help but think of all the nights Melissa's neighbor had slept soundly, unaware of the predator moving through the walls, and of how close Emma Walker had come to sharing Melissa's fate. The Elmwood apartment stood quiet once more, its secrets exposed to the fading afternoon light. Behind the respectable facade, between the walls that had witnessed decades of lives unfolding, the empty passages now echoed with the footsteps of investigators rather than those of an intruder. For the current residents, the comfort of home had been irreparably altered by the knowledge that, for months, none of them had ever truly been alone. Story 3, the light in the corner cafe filtered through antique glass windows, casting honey-colored patterns across worn wooden tables. Outside, autumn leaves tumbled across the sidewalk, occasionally catching in small whirlwinds before settling again. Inside, the gentle hum of conversation blended with the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine, a soundtrack of ordinary life unfolding on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Millfield. Emma Matthews wrapped her hands around her ceramic mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. The coffee shop had become her sanctuary over the past year, a place where she could work on her novel without the distractions of her apartment. Today, however, she found her attention drawn to the man who had just settled at the table beside her, tall, with salt and pepper hair and glasses that seemed too large for his narrow face. He smiled when he caught her glance, a gentle, almost familiar smile. "You're a writer," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. His voice carried a slight accent she couldn't place. "I've seen you here before, always typing." Emma nodded, surprised but not alarmed. She was a regular, after all. "Working on a novel," she replied, her voice soft against the background noise of clinking cups and subdued conversations. "About the little girl who collected blue stones by the creek, the one who built fairy houses under the willow tree." His smile remained gentle, his tone conversational. Emma felt the warmth drain from her fingers, despite the hot mug still cradled in her hands. Those weren't details from her novel. Those were memories from her childhood, private memories that lived in faded photographs stored in boxes in her parents' attic 2 states away. Memories she had never written about, never shared with friends in this town where she had lived for barely 14 months. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice steadier than she expected. "Do I know you?" The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with eyes that now seemed too intense, too knowing. "Not exactly," he answered, "but I know you, Emma, the way you built those little stone stacks by Miller's Creek when you were 7, the way you cried when your brother knocked them down." A cold sensation spread slowly across Emma's shoulders, down her spine. The calf noises receded, as if someone had gradually turned down the volume on reality itself. She hadn't thought about Miller's Creek in years, decades, perhaps. She hadn't been back to her hometown of Selwood since her parents moved to Arizona after her college graduation. "How could you possibly know that?" Her voice had dropped to just above a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, his coffee untouched. You wrote about it, you just don't remember. Detective Laurel Simmons flipped through the pages of Emma Matthews' statement for the third time, her eyes lingering on certain phrases, certain details. The overhead lights in the precinct hummed with a low, persistent sound that had become white noise after 15 years on the force. Outside her office window, darkness had settled over the city hours ago. "So she just left the caf?" Simmons asked, looking up at Officer Reyes, who stood in the doorway, his notepad in hand. "According to the barista, yes," said she. Looked spooked but not panicked, packed up her laptop and left without finishing her coffee. The man stayed for another 20 minutes, then left as well. Simmons nodded slowly, mentally adding this to the pattern she had been tracking for months now. And this was Tuesday, 3 days before she disappeared. "Yes, ma'am." Surveillance from her apartment building shows her coming home that evening, then leaving for work Wednesday and Thursday. Friday morning she leaves at 7:15 a.m., which her colleagues confirm is normal. She never arrived at the office. Simmons stood, stretching her back slightly before walking to the board where 5 photographs were arranged in a neat row. 5 women, ages 27 to 34, all reported missing in the last 18 months, all from different parts of the city, different backgrounds, different occupations. Emma Matthews, 31, was the latest. The only commonality Simmons had found was impossibly thin, nearly invisible, until Emma's roommate had mentioned a strange encounter Emma had described just days before vanishing. Now, with Emma's detailed statement about the man in the caf provided to her roommate via text message, Simmons could see the thread connecting at least 3 of the cases. "He knew things about them," she murmured, more to herself than to Officer Reyes. "Personal things from their childhoods." The room felt suddenly colder, the hum of the lights more pronounced against the silence that followed her words. In a basement room at the Millfield Public Library, reference librarian Theodore Walsh carefully opened a leather-bound volume. His fingers, protected by thin cotton gloves, turned pages that had yellowed with age. The local history collection was his domain, a quiet kingdom of archives and forgotten stories. The detective's questions that morning had left him unsettled. 5 missing women was disturbing enough in a city the size of Millfield, but the detective's specific inquiry about childhood writing, school newspapers, literary magazines, community publications from surrounding counties had sparked something in his memory. His eyes scanned the contents of Young Voices, a collection of children's writing, 1992-1994, published by the Selwood Elementary School. There on page 37 was a story by 8-year-old Emma Matthews titled My Secret Place. It described, in a child's straightforward prose, building stone towers by Miller's Creek and making fairy houses under a willow tree. Theodore's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone to call Detective Simmons. The investigation unfolded like a book being read in reverse, starting with the ending and slowly revealing the beginning. Detective Simmons discovered that all 5 missing women had, as children, published stories, poems, or essays in local publications. Small-town newspapers, school literary magazines, community newsletters, humble venues where young voices were celebrated and preserved. Publications that had in recent years been digitized and made available in online archives. Publications that contained intimate details of childhood experiences, fears, dreams, and memories, fragments of lives that could be studied, memorized, and recited back to strangers in coffee shops, bookstores, and art galleries. Details that would seem impossible for a stranger to know, Unless they were supernatural or stalkers of an impossible thoroughness, Simmons explained to her lieutenant, her voice low in the precinct's quiet evening atmosphere. He approaches them with knowledge that seems impossible, creates an immediate mystery, makes them question reality itself. 3 weeks after Emma Matthews vanished, a storage unit rented under a false name was discovered in a facility on the outskirts of Millfield. Inside, investigators found carefully organized files, digital and physical, containing childhood writings from dozens of women across 3 states. Highlighted passages, annotated margins, detailed notes on locations and routines. They also found personal items, a silver bracelet identified as belonging to the first missing woman, a monogrammed leather planner from the third, a distinctive scarf that Emma Matthews had been wearing in the CAF surveillance footage. But of the women themselves, or the man with the 2 large glasses who seemed to know impossible things, there was no trace. 6 months later, Detective Simmons stood in the dim light of her home office, staring at the board she had recreated there after the case had officially gone cold. The faces of the 5 women were still arranged in a neat row, but now they were surrounded by hundreds of small index cards, strings connecting various points, creating a web of information that occupied an entire wall. The man had not resurfaced. No new disappearances matching the pattern had been reported in Millfield or surrounding counties. The digital trail had led to dead ends, prepaid credit cards, false identities, IP addresses that looped back on themselves. As Simmons turned to leave, her eyes caught on something she hadn't noticed before: a small literary magazine from her own elementary school, dated nearly 30 years ago. She had been using it as a coaster for her coffee mug, a relic from her mother's attic she'd brought home while researching childhood publications. A cold realization spread through her as she lifted the magazine, flipping to the contents page. There, listed among 24 children's names, was L. Simmons, age 9, a poem about a secret hiding place in her grandmother's garden, where she had buried a tin box containing her most treasured possessions. She stood very still in the silent room, listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock. Something about the sound reminded her of fingers typing, of someone taking notes, of someone reading very carefully through the forgotten words of a child who had grown into a detective who searched for missing women. Outside, the wind rustled through autumn leaves, occasionally catching them in small whirlwinds before letting them settle again, covering tracks, erasing paths, while somewhere in the darkness, someone who knew impossible things waited patiently, collecting stories that had yet to reach their final page. Story 4. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Highway 41, stretching like tired fingers over the cracked asphalt. Detective Morgan Reed pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching as the uniform landscape of central Nevada rolled by an endless canvas of sagebrush and distant mountains that seemed to shift but never change. The rental car's air conditioning hummed softly, almost matching the rhythm of her partner's steady breathing as he drove. 3 hours since the last gas station, Detective Liam Foster noted, his voice low and measured like someone speaking in a library. His hands rested at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, knuckles slightly white from the 6-hour drive. GPS says we're still 40 miles from the next town. Morgan didn't respond immediately. Her mind was occupied with the case files spread across her lap, photographs and interview transcripts that told the story of Sarah and Michael Dawson, a couple from Seattle whose road trip had ended in perplexing circumstances 5 months ago. They had vanished for 72 hours before reappearing on this very highway, disoriented and with conflicting memories. The Bureau had written it off as desert-induced confusion or perhaps recreational drugs, but something in their separate testimonies had caught Morgan's attention, a consistency in their inconsistencies that felt intentional rather than confused. They both mentioned a town, Morgan said finally, her finger resting on a highlighted section of Michael Dawson's statement. A town that shouldn't exist, perfectly normal on the surface, but somehow wrong. Foster adjusted the air vent. People see mirages in the desert all the time. People don't collectively hallucinate the same mirage, Morgan countered, and they certainly don't bring back physical evidence. In her hand, she held a small paper receipt from a diner called Sunshine Corner, dated correctly, but with a location that didn't exist on any map. The paper was real, the ink authentic. The forensic team had confirmed it wasn't a forgery. The car rounded a bend, and the unbroken horizon suddenly gave way to a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. The transition was so abrupt that Foster tapped the brakes instinctively. "That's unexpected," he said, peering through the windshield at what appeared to be a small town ahead. "Is this on our route?" Morgan checked the GPS. The blue line of their planned journey stretched uninterrupted across the screen. No town was indicated for another 40 miles. She felt a subtle tightening in her chest, not quite fear, but the familiar alertness that came when patterns began to align. "Let's check it out," she said, closing the file on her lap. "We need gas anyway." Foster nodded and eased the car forward. A weathered welcome sign appeared on their right. "Welcome to Millbrook, where friends are always expected." The paint was sun-faded but not old, as if it had weathered years of sunlight in mere months. Millbrook was the definition of quaint, a main street lined with shops, a town square with a gazebo, and neighborhoods of modest homes radiating outward. People strolled along the sidewalks, nodding pleasantly as the detective's car passed. Everything appeared perfectly normal, and yet Morgan felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "Foster," she said quietly, "this town isn't on any map." They parked in front of a gas station with a hand-painted sign. As Foster filled the tank, Morgan stepped into the adjoining convenience store. A bell above the door announced her entrance with a cheerful ding. The woman behind the counter looked up and smiled warmly. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice honey-sweet but with an undertone that Morgan couldn't quite place. "You must be passing through. We don't get many visitors these days." "Just needed some gas," Morgan replied, careful to keep her tone casual. "Lovely town you have here." "Oh, we like it," the woman her name tag read Betty replied. "Small, but it has everything you need. Say, you wouldn't happen to be headed to Carson City, would you?" Morgan hadn't mentioned their destination to anyone in town. "We might be," she said. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Betty said, her smile unwavering. "Just making conversation. Will you be staying for dinner? The Sunshine Corner makes a pot roast on Thursdays that's simply to die for." The Sunshine Corner, the same diner named on the Dawsons' receipt. Morgan felt her pulse quicken slightly. "We might," she said. "Thanks for the recommendation." Outside, Foster was waiting by the car, his expression troubled. "Morgan," he said as she approached, "I just tried to call the field office. No signal. And the guy at the garage across the street, he knew my name before I introduced myself." Morgan's eyes scanned the street, taking in details that had escaped her initial observation. Every person visible was engaged in some activity, walking, shopping, chatting, but there was a mechanical quality to their movements, like actors hitting their marks in a play. "Let's drive around a bit," she suggested. "Get the lay of the land." Foster nodded and they got back in the car. They drove slowly through Millbrook, mapping its boundaries. The town was small enough to navigate in 20 minutes, yet somehow Foster's attempts to find an exit route kept bringing them back to the main street. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered after the third time they passed the same gazebo. "We should have reached the highway by now." Morgan checked her watch. The sun was beginning to set, casting an amber glow over the buildings that made them look like they were glowing from within. "Let's try the diner," she said. The Dawsons mentioned it specifically in their statements. The Sunshine Corner sat at the end of Main Street, a classic American diner with chrome accents and large windows. As they entered, conversation didn't pause another deviation from the normal pattern when strangers enter a small-town establishment. Instead, several patrons nodded as if they'd been expecting them. A waitress led them to a booth by the window without asking if they preferred a table. On the way, Morgan noted that every table was occupied, yet the sound level in the restaurant was unnaturally low, conversations just a touch too quiet to overhear. "Today's special is pot roast," the waitress said, placing two menus before them. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" "Yes, please," Morgan replied, studying the woman's face. She was middle-aged, with smile lines around her eyes that seemed genuine. Morgan's gaze dropped to the waitress's name tag, Alice. After Alice walked away, Foster leaned forward. "This place matches the Dawsons' description exactly," he whispered, "right down to the red leather booths and the vintage jukebox." Morgan nodded, her eyes scanning the diner. Nothing seemed overtly threatening, yet every instinct told her something was fundamentally wrong with Millbrook. The coffee arrived too quickly, as if it had been prepared in anticipation of their order. Alice set down the cups with practiced precision. "Enjoy," she said. "The pot roast will be out shortly." "We haven't ordered yet," Foster pointed out. Alice's smile didn't waver. "Trust me, honey, you'll want the pot roast." As she walked away, Morgan lifted her coffee cup, studying the rich, dark liquid before taking a careful sip. It was exactly how she preferred it, strong, with a hint of cinnamon. She had never mentioned this preference to anyone in Millbrook. "Foster," she said quietly, "I think we need to leave. Now." They stood to go, but found their path blocked by a tall man in a sheriff's uniform. He had appeared seemingly from nowhere, his badge catching the light as he approached their table. "Leaving so soon, Detectives Reed and Foster?" he asked, his voice pleasant but firm. "That would be a shame. We've gone to such trouble to prepare for your arrival." Morgan felt a chill run through her. "How do you know our names?" The sheriff, his badge read Sheriff Thomas, smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "The same way we knew about the Dawsons and the couple before them and the travelers before that. Millbrook has a way of knowing who needs to visit." Foster's hand drifted toward his concealed weapon. "What is this place?" "Just a town," Sheriff Thomas said, gesturing for them to sit back down. "A special town that appears to those who need to find it, or sometimes to those we need to find." Reluctantly, they returned to their seats. Around them, the diner continued to function normally, yet Morgan noticed that no one seemed to be finishing their meals. Plates remained perpetually half full, coffee cups never emptied. What happened to the Dawsons? Morgan asked. They stayed with us for a while, the sheriff replied, sliding into the booth beside Foster. They learned what they needed to learn, then they moved on, just like you will. And what is it that we need to learn? Foster's voice had an edge to it now. Sheriff Thomas smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. That depends entirely on why Millbrook called to you. You see, some places exist in the spaces between not quite here, not quite there. Millbrook appears when it's needed to those who are needed. Morgan thought of the case files in the car, of the Dawsons' confused testimonies and the strange receipt. You're saying this town appears and disappears. I'm saying, Detective Reed, that reality isn't as solid as most people believe. There are seams in the world where the unusual can slip through. Millbrook exists in one of those seams. Their food arrived pot roast with vegetables, exactly as promised. The aroma was mouth-watering, the presentation perfect. Morgan stared at her plate, reluctant to eat yet strangely tempted. It's perfectly safe, the sheriff assured them. Consider it a welcome gift. Foster pushed his plate away. I'd rather understand why we can't leave. You can leave whenever you wish, Sheriff Thomas replied. But first, there's something you need to see, both of you. That's how it works. Millbrook keeps you until you find what you came for, even if you didn't know you were looking. As night fell outside, the diner took on a dreamlike quality. The lights dimmed slightly, and Morgan noticed that some of the patrons had disappeared without her seeing them leave. Those who remained seemed less distinct somehow, as if they were fading into the background. Come, the sheriff said, standing, I'll show you. Against her better judgment, Morgan followed him outside, Foster close behind. The streets of Millbrook were now lit by old-fashioned lampposts that cast pools of warm light on the sidewalks. The sheriff led them to the town square, where the gazebo stood illuminated by strings of delicate lights. Inside the gazebo was a large book on a pedestal, its pages open to reveal handwritten entries. The sheriff gestured for them to look. Every visitor to Millbrook has left their mark here, he explained. Their stories, their discoveries, their warnings. Morgan leaned closer, recognizing Sarah Dawson's handwriting on one page. The entry was detailed and coherent, nothing like the confused testimony she had given to the police after her disappearance. Millbrook showed us what we were becoming, Sarah had written, how close we were to losing ourselves in our ambition. Michael and I came here as strangers to each other, despite 10 years of marriage. We're leaving as partners again. Thank you for the reminder of what matters. Foster was reading another entry, his brow furrowed. These are all therapeutic experiences, people finding answers to personal problems. Usually, the sheriff nodded. Sometimes Millbrook helps people remember what they've forgotten about themselves. Sometimes it helps them see truths they've been avoiding. And sometimes what? Morgan prompted. The sheriff's expression grew serious. Sometimes Millbrook needs help in return. Detectives who can solve a mystery, perhaps, or individuals with specific skills that are required. Morgan felt a creeping unease. Required for what? To keep Millbrook existing, he said simply. To maintain the balance between what is and what could be. This town sits at a crossroads of possibilities, Detective Reed. It requires caretakers. Foster stepped back from the book. And you think we're meant to be caretakers. That's why we can't leave. I think, the sheriff said carefully, that you came looking for answers about the Dawsons. but Millbrook called to you for reasons of its own, and until those reasons are fulfilled, every road will lead you back here." As if to emphasize his point, a soft mist began to roll through the streets, blurring the edges of buildings and obscuring the distant houses. The town was disappearing into the fog piece by piece. "What's happening?" Morgan asked, watching as the storefronts began to fade. "Millbrook exists in moments," Sheriff Thomas explained, his own outline becoming slightly less defined. "It appears when needed and fades when its purpose is complete. But lately, those moments have been growing shorter. The town is struggling to maintain its connection to your reality. And you need us to help stabilize it," Foster concluded. "How exactly would we do that?" The sheriff placed a hand on the book. "By understanding, by believing, by acknowledging that there are aspects of reality beyond what your FBI training has taught you. Millbrook needs witnesses who can carry its truth back to the wider world." Morgan looked around at the fading town, at the buildings and people who seemed both perfectly real and impossibly transient. Part of her, the rational, bureau-trained investigator, insisted this was all an elaborate hoax or perhaps a shared hallucination. But another part, a deeper intuition, recognized something profound and genuine in the sheriff's words. "If we help you," she said slowly, "if we become these witnesses, what happens to us?" "You return to your world," the sheriff promised, "with memories intact, unlike the Dawsons who chose to forget most of their time here. You'll carry Millbrook with you, keeping it alive in your understanding. And perhaps when the time is right, you'll guide others who need to find us." Foster exchanged a look with Morgan, a silent communication born of years working together. They had pursued this case because it defied rational explanation. Now they were being offered answers that transcended rationality itself. "What do we need to do?" Morgan asked finally. The sheriff smiled, relief evident in his expression. "First, you need to truly see Millbrook not as a mystery to solve, but as a reality to accept. Then you need to record your experience in the book, creating a tether between your world and ours." As they stood in the increasingly misty town square, Morgan felt the boundaries of her understanding stretch and shift. Millbrook wasn't simply a town that appeared and disappeared. It was a manifestation of something larger, a reminder that reality contained more wonder and mystery than most people ever glimpsed. She stepped forward and took the pen that the sheriff offered, its weight surprisingly solid in her hand. Foster followed, his skepticism visibly warring with his direct experience of this impossible place. Together they began to write their story in the book, not just the facts of their investigation, but their perceptions and feelings, their doubts and gradual acceptance. As they wrote, the mist seemed to retreat slightly, the buildings around them becoming more substantial once again. "It's working," the sheriff murmured. "You're anchoring us." When they finished writing, the sheriff closed the book gently. "Thank you," he said. "Millbrook will remember your contribution." "How do we leave?" Foster asked, looking around at the town that now seemed fully present again, solid and real under the night sky. "The same way you came," the sheriff replied. "But this time, the road will take you where you expect to go." As they walked back to their car, Morgan noticed subtle changes in Millbrook. The townspeople nodded to them with genuine recognition now, not the artificial welcome of their arrival. The buildings had taken on a weathered quality that spoke of real history, not manufactured quaintness. Foster started the engine and they drove slowly down Main Street toward the town limits. Neither spoke as the buildings grew sparser, eventually giving way to the open desert. Morgan watched in the side mirror as the lights of Millbrook receded, until finally they turned a bend and the town vanished from view. Ahead, Highway 41 stretched into the darkness, a pale ribbon under the star-filled sky. The GPS blinked back to life, showing their position exactly where they should be on their journey to Carson City. "Did that really happen?" Foster asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Morgan touched the notebook in her pocket where she had copied their entry from the town's book. The pages felt warm under her fingers, a tangible reminder of an impossible experience. "Yes," she said, "and somewhere Millbrook is still there, waiting for the next travelers who need to find it or who it needs to find." As they drove through the night, Morgan wondered how many other places existed in the seams of reality, hidden from casual observation, but profoundly real nonetheless. And she wondered who else might have visited them, returning changed in ways that could never be explained to those who hadn't seen for themselves. Behind them, for just a moment, the horizon flickered with distant lights. Then the darkness returned, complete and unbroken, as if the town that wasn't there yesterday had never existed at all. Story 5. The autumn air hung still over Millfield Lane, carrying with it the faint scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. Amber light from a setting sun cast long shadows across the porch of number 47, a Victorian house with cream-colored siding and forest green shutters. Detective Sarah Holloway's sedan was the only vehicle parked along the quiet street, its presence as unobtrusive as the woman herself. Inside, the house remained exactly as it had been found 3 days prior, boxes half unpacked, a coffee mug on the kitchen counter, lipstick still marking its rim, the quiet stillness of a life interrupted. Sarah moved through the space with practiced precision, her footsteps barely audible against the hardwood floors. The case file labeled Morgan, ELISC, rested in her hands, its weight familiar after days of review. She opened it once more, eyes skimming past the details she had already committed to memory. Elise Morgan, 34, literature professor, recently divorced, no children, purchased the house 6 weeks ago. Reported missing by her department chair after failing to appear for the first week of classes. And then there was the letter. Sarah withdrew the evidence bag containing it. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, with a texture that spoke of tradition and formality. The handwriting flowed across the page in deliberate strokes of faded blue ink. She had read it dozens of times already, but something about it continued to pull at her attention. "Welcome home," it read. "I've been waiting for you." No signature, no return address. According to neighbors, it had been found in Elise's mailbox on moving day, before she had even received her first piece of regular mail, before anyone in town should have known she was coming. The detective slipped the letter back into its protective sleeve and continued her methodical exploration of the house. The living room revealed nothing unusual, books still in boxes, a reading lamp positioned near a comfortable armchair, a fireplace that showed signs of recent use despite the mild weather. Sarah noted this detail in her small leather-bound notebook, the scratch of her pen against paper the only sound in the empty house. In the kitchen, she found more half-finished tasks. Grocery bags still contained some items. A bottle of wine stood unopened on the counter beside 2 glasses. Sarah carefully opened drawers and cabinets, noting the orderly arrangement of everything inside. Elise Morgan had been methodical, organized, not the type to disappear without warning. Upstairs, the bedroom told a similar story. The bed was made, but a nightgown lay across it as if Elise had been preparing for sleep. On the nightstand sat a stack of books, a glass of water, and a small silver frame containing a photograph of an older couple parents, perhaps, though they hadn't been able to reach any family yet. It was in the study that Sarah found something new, a second letter tucked beneath a paperweight on the antique desk. The same cream-colored paper, the same deliberate handwriting. I see you've settled in nicely. Your books look wonderful on these shelves. I especially like your collection of Gothic literature. We have so much in common. Sarah's breath caught slightly. This letter hadn't been in the initial report. Either it had been missed in the preliminary search, or... She carefully placed the letter in an evidence bag, noting the absence of fingerprints other than what would likely be Elise's own. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Someone had been watching Elise. Someone had been inside her house. Back at the station, the soft hum of fluorescent lights provided a counterpoint to the gentle tapping of keyboards and murmured conversations. Sarah pinned the two letters to the investigation board, stepping back to study them alongside the timeline they'd constructed. Coffee, Detective Marcus Reeves appeared at her side, offering a steaming mug that smelled of hazelnut. Thanks, she accepted it without taking her eyes off the board. We need to search the house again. I found a second letter. Someone was watching her, Marcus, maybe even entering the house when she wasn't home. Or while she was sleeping, he suggested quietly. Sarah nodded, the disquieting thought settling between them like a physical presence. Any luck with the handwriting analysis? She asked. Nothing conclusive. The expert says it's distinctive, but not in any database. Educated penmanship, possibly someone with formal training from an earlier era, teacher maybe, or someone who went to private school decades ago. Sarah sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest. What about the historical society? Elise was researching the house's history for her book. Maybe someone there took an unusual interest. I've got interviews scheduled for tomorrow. 5 members who were particularly helpful to her. The investigation continued to unfold at a measured pace. Days passed into weeks. More letters emerged, one found in Elise's faculty mailbox at the university, another delivered to her favorite coffee shop downtown, each one more personal than the last, each one suggesting a deepening familiarity that Elise had never acknowledged to anyone. Your hair looked lovely in the sunlight yesterday. The red highlights remind me of autumn leaves. I noticed you've been reading Poe before bed. His stories always gave me nightmares. Do you dream of being buried alive too? The blue sweater brings out your eyes. You should wear it more often. I'm watching, always watching. The town of Millfield wasn't accustomed to mysteries. Founded in the late 1800s, it had the quiet dignity of a place where generations had lived and died without much disruption to the established order. But as news of Elise's disappearance and the unsettling letters spread, a current of unease rippled through the community. Sarah found herself returning to the house on Millfield Lane repeatedly, drawn by the conviction that the answer lay somewhere within its walls. On her 5th visit, she noticed something about the fireplace, a slight discoloration on one of the bricks. Pressing against it revealed a small compartment hidden in the chimney wall. Inside was a journal, its leather cover worn with age. The pages contained entries dating back to 1920, written by a woman named Clara Blackwood. As Sarah carefully turned the fragile pages, a story emerged of isolation and obsession. Clara had lived in the house alone after her husband's death, apparently developing an unhealthy fixation on subsequent residents. The journal detailed her observations of their daily habits, her gradual insinuation into their lives, and her rage when they inevitably failed to notice her. The final entry was dated June 17, 1937. They never truly see me. They live in my house, breathe my air, but remain blind to my presence. Perhaps in death I will finally be acknowledged. Historical records confirmed that Clara Blackwood had died in the house, by her own hand, on that very date. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air settled over Sarah as she connected the scattered pieces. The handwriting on the letters matched the journal perfectly. The paper, when tested, contained fibers consistent with manufacturing processes from the 1930s. But how could a woman dead for nearly 90 years be sending letters to Elise Morgan? The answer came when they finally located the missing professor, alive but disoriented, in a small cabin 20 miles outside of town. Elise's story emerged slowly, between stretches of silence and confused tears. She had become convinced someone was watching her, entering her home. Sleep had become impossible. In her exhaustion, she'd begun to see a woman in a white dress moving through the house at night. Eventually, fear drove her to flee. When shown Clara's journal, Elise's hands trembled. I was researching her for my book on female Gothic writers. She published one novel in 1923, then disappeared from literary history. I wanted to resurrect her work. She looked up at Sarah, eyes wide. I found some of her letters in the university archives and included them in my manuscript. I must have absorbed her handwriting style. The psychological evaluation suggested a rare combination of extreme stress, sleep deprivation, and a previously undiagnosed condition that had led Elise to experience a dissociative state. In this altered consciousness, she had written the letters herself, placing them where she would later find them, creating a mystery that her mind couldn't solve. The case file was officially closed 6 weeks later. The logical explanation satisfied most involved a sad story of mental health crisis rather than a supernatural enigma. Elise Morgan recovered slowly under professional care, eventually returning to teaching, though she sold the house on Millfield Lane without ever going back inside. Detective Sarah Holloway filed her final report, attaching all the required documentation, but she kept one detail to herself. In the final search of the house, after Elise had been found, she had discovered one more letter tucked inside the hidden compartment in the fireplace. The handwriting was the same, but the ink was fresh. You found my journal, you found my letters, you found my Elise, but you didn't find me. No one ever does. I'm still waiting. I'm still watching. And someone new will move in soon. Sarah drove past the house occasionally in the months that followed. A sold sign appeared in the spring. A young couple moved in, their faces bright with the excitement of first-time homeowners. She considered stopping, saying something, warning them. But what would she say? That a house could hold more than memories. That paper and ink could bridge the gap between the living and the dead. That some forms of waiting never end. Instead, she drove on, leaving the house on Millfield Lane to its quiet existence and whatever else might dwell within its walls, watching and waiting for another welcome letter to write. Story 6. She had bought the antique mirror at an estate sale, enchanted by its elegant frame. But as she cleaned the glass, she noticed something strange. Faint fingerprints appeared too small to be her own, and worse, they moved every time she looked away. The small town of Millfield had always been known for its antique stores and estate sales. The death of Eleanor Maitland, the elderly widow who lived in the Victorian house on Maple Street, had brought collectors from neighboring counties to her estate sale. Among them was Diane Kepler, a 34-year-old librarian with a passion for vintage furniture. The mirror caught her eye immediately. Oval-shaped with an ornate silver frame, it seemed to capture light differently than the other objects in the dimly lit parlor. As Diane ran her fingers along the intricate patterns of the frame, she felt a subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, like the faintest hum of electricity. She dismissed it as excitement and purchased the mirror for a surprisingly modest sum. Detective James Morgan sat at his desk, the soft yellow light from his lamp casting long shadows across the case files spread before him. The rain tapped gently against the window, creating a soothing rhythm in the otherwise silent police station. It was nearly midnight, but sleep had become a distant acquaintance since Diane Kepler had walked into the station 3 weeks ago. Her story had seemed implausible at first, a mirror with moving fingerprints, a voice whispering a child's name in the middle of the night, the overwhelming scent of lilacs when no flowers were present. Morgan had initially suspected stress, perhaps even early signs of a mental health crisis, but then came the photographs. The ones Diane had taken showed nothing unusual, just an antique mirror reflecting her bedroom. But the pictures found in Alina Maitland's attic told a different story. Black and white photographs from 1957 showed the same mirror hanging in a child's bedroom. A smiling girl of about 8 stood beside it. On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink, Lucy with her birthday present. Morgan sipped his coffee, now cold and bitter. The case file on Lucy Maitland had been thin. Reported missing on October 17, 1957. No signs of forced entry, no suspects, no resolution. The case had gone cold before Morgan was even born. The detective ran his fingers over the statements he had collected. Alina Maitland had been Lucy's mother. After her daughter's disappearance, she had removed the mirror from Lucy's room and stored it in the attic, wrapped in a sheet and placed behind trunks of old clothes. She never remarried, never had more children. She lived alone in the house until her death 2 months ago at the age of 93. What had compelled Alina to keep the mirror, and why had she hidden it away? The questions lingered in Morgan's mind as he carefully examined the photographs Diane had taken each day since bringing the mirror home. In the first picture, the mirror reflected only Diane's bedroom. In the second, taken a day later, a barely perceptible smudge appeared in the lower corner of the glass. By the 5th day, the smudge had evolved into what clearly resembled small fingerprints. By the 10th day, Diane claimed the fingerprints would rearrange themselves whenever she looked away. By the 15th day, she said she could hear a child humming. Dr. Emma Reynolds, the forensic psychologist who had examined Diane, found no evidence of hallucinations or paranoia. "She's frightened," Dr. Reynolds had written in her report, but entirely lucid. Morgan closed the file and leaned back in his chair. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against the window. There was one more person he needed to speak with, someone who might remember the original investigation into Lucy's disappearance. Former Sheriff Walter Green was 91 now, living in a care facility on the outskirts of town. His mind wandered sometimes, but on good days, his memory reached back decades with surprising clarity. When Morgan visited him the next morning, he found the former sheriff sitting by a window watching birds gather at a feeder. "That mirror," Green said softly, after Morgan explained why he had come. "We never could figure out its significance." "What do you mean?" Morgan asked, leaning forward. "The night Lucy disappeared, her fingerprints were found all over that mirror, not just on the frame, but on the glass itself, more fingerprints than made sense, like she had pressed her hands against it hundreds of times in a single evening." Green's eyes drifted back to the window. Alina insisted the mirror had something to do with it. Said Lucy had been talking to it, that she'd heard her daughter whispering to her reflection. We thought grief was making her irrational. Morgan felt a chill despite the warmth of the room and the investigation. We searched for months, the whole town did, but there was never a trace of her. Green turned back to Morgan, his eyes suddenly sharp, except for one thing. Every year on the anniversary of Lucy's disappearance, Alina would find fresh fingerprints on the mirror in the attic, small ones, child-sized. She would call us, and every year we would tell her it was dust, or her imagination, or her own fingerprints she didn't remember leaving. Morgan drove to Diane's apartment with Green's words echoing in his mind. Diane opened the door looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept in days. "It's getting worse," she whispered, leading him to her bedroom. The mirror hung on the wall opposite her bed. In the afternoon light, Morgan could clearly see what had terrified Diane. Small fingerprints covered the surface of the glass, arranged in patterns that almost resembled writing. As they stood watching, a sweet scent filled the room, lilacs in full bloom, though no flowers were present. And then, so faintly that Morgan almost missed it, the sound of a child humming a melody from another time. "I researched the previous owners," Diane said, her voice barely audible. "The mirror is much older than we thought. Before the Maitlands, it belonged to the Prescott family in the 1930s. They also lost a child, a daughter. And before them, it was in the possession of the Whittaker family in the 1890s. Their youngest daughter vanished as well." Morgan stared at the mirror, watching as one of the fingerprints slowly moved across the glass, leaving a trail like a tear. The investigation into Lucy Maitland's disappearance was officially reopened the next day. Forensic technicians carefully removed the mirror from Diane's wall and transported it to the lab for analysis. The fingerprints on the glass matched Lucy Maitland's prints from her school records, preserved all these years in the case file. But there were other prints as well, smaller ones, older ones. The technicians found layer upon layer of children's fingerprints, some dating back decades, some centuries. What they discovered behind the mirror was more disturbing. When they removed the ornate silver backing, they found names scratched into the wood beneath. Lucy Maitland, Emily Prescott, Catherine Whittaker, dozens more dating back to when the mirror was first crafted in 1815. The history of the mirror was gradually pieced together through auction records and family histories. It had passed from family to family, always sold after tragedy, always connected to a missing child, always a girl between the ages of 7 and 10, always disappeared without a trace. Detective Morgan sits in his office now, listening to the familiar sound of rain against the window. The mirror has been secured in an evidence locker, its glass surface covered, its frame bound with chains, a precaution that feels both necessary and absurdly insufficient. The case remains open, one of many in a long line of mysteries connected to the mirror. The town has fallen quiet again. Diane Kepler has moved away, seeking a fresh start in a city where antique mirrors do not whisper in the night. Sometimes, late in the evening when the station is empty, Morgan finds himself drawn to the evidence room. He stands before the covered mirror, listening. On some nights, he swears he can detect the faint scent of lilacs and the soft, distant sound of children humming together in perfect harmony. He never uncovers the glass. Some reflections, he has learned, are better left unseen. Story 7. The warm amber light of the hotel lobby cast long shadows across the polished marble floor. A quiet hum of conversation lingered in the air as guests checked in for the night, their voices barely rising above the soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. Among them stood Elaine Harper, a pharmaceutical sales representative from Boston, waiting patiently at the front desk. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away, marking the minutes past midnight. "Room 213, the clerk said, sliding a brass key with a heavy tassel across the counter. The metal was cool against Elaine's palm as she closed her fingers around it. "Elevators are to your right, second floor." She nodded her thanks, wheeling her suitcase across the lobby, the sound of its wheels creating a gentle rhythm against the floor. The Westbrook Hotel had stood in downtown Chicago since 1924, maintaining its vintage charm while carefully updating its amenities. As a frequent business traveler, Elaine appreciated its predictable comfort. The elevator ascended with a subtle whirring sound, doors opening to reveal a long hallway carpeted in deep burgundy. Elaine's footsteps were muffled as she made her way down the corridor, key in hand, eyes scanning the brass numbers affixed to each door. 209, 210, 211, 212. As she stopped, something wasn't right. After room 212, the next door displayed 214 in polished numerals that caught the soft light from the wall sconces. Elaine backtracked, thinking perhaps she had missed room 213, but there was no mistake. The room simply wasn't there. Fatigue clouded her judgment momentarily. Perhaps she had misheard the clerk. With a slight frown creasing her brow, she made her way back to the elevator and descended to the lobby. The same clerk was still at the desk, now sorting through a stack of registration cards with methodical precision. "Excuse me," Elaine said, placing the key on the counter. "There seems to be some confusion. You assigned me room 213, but I can't seem to find it. The numbers skip from 212 to 214. The clerk's hands went still. His expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, as he looked at the key and then at Elaine. "Ma'am, we don't have a room 213 in this hotel." His voice had lowered almost imperceptibly. "And this isn't our key." The statement hung in the air between them. Elaine looked down at the brass key with its worn tassel. It certainly looked like the other hotel keys she had observed guests carrying. "But you just gave this to me 5 minutes ago." She pushed the key closer to him. "For room 213. The clerk shook his head slowly. "I checked you into room 318. Your key card is plastic, like all our current keys." He reached beneath the counter and produced a thin plastic card with the hotel's logo. "We haven't used brass keys in over 15 years. The lobby suddenly felt colder to Elaine, the hushed conversations of other guests fading into the background as she stared at the brass key still lying on the counter. Detective Marcus Reed sipped his coffee, grimacing at the bitterness of the station's perpetually overbrewed blend. The case file lay open on his desk, photographs and statements spread out in a careful arrangement that might reveal connections not immediately apparent. 2 weeks had passed since Elaine Harper had reported the strange incident at the Westbrook Hotel. What had begun as an odd complaint had evolved into something more disturbing when 3 other guests reported similar experiences, each given a key to room 213, a room that didn't exist according to the hotel's floor plans. Each guest had reported receiving the key from the front desk clerk, though security footage never showed any such exchange taking place. Reed's partner, Detective Sophia Chen, set down her own mug as she entered the office, her expression thoughtful. "I spoke with the hotel historian," she said, settling into the chair opposite Reed. The Westbrook did have a room 213 until 1976. Then they renovated that floor and eliminated it during reconstruction. Reed nodded, making a note in the margin of his notepad. Any reason why? That's where it gets interesting, Chen leaned forward. In 1974, a guest in room 213 disappeared. Emily Winters, 34, checked in for a 3-day stay but was never seen leaving. The room was found in perfect order, bed made, no personal belongings left behind. They never found her. The detectives fell silent, the soft whirring of the office's ventilation system filling the quiet between them. "So what's the connection to our brass keys?" Reed finally asked, turning one of the evidence bags containing a key that had been surrendered by a guest. The lab had confirmed it was genuinely antique, at least 40 years old. "I checked the hotel records from that time period," Chen replied. "Before electronic key cards, the Westbrook used brass keys exactly like these. And here's where it gets even stranger. After Winters disappeared, several guests reported receiving keys to room 213, even though it had been sealed off during the investigation." The historian had shown Chen photographs from the hotel's archives. The original room 213 had been located exactly where modern guests reported finding nothing but wall space between rooms 212 and 214. Over the next several months, the detectives interviewed dozens of former hotel employees. Most had nothing substantial to offer, but Marion Geller, a housekeeper who had worked at the Westbrook from 1968 to 1982, recalled something unusual. Emily Winters wasn't the first, she told them, her aged hands trembling slightly as she poured tea in her modest apartment. There were others who stayed in that room and reported strange things, voices when no one was there, personal items moving overnight. One man insisted someone had slept in his bed while he was out for dinner, though the room had not been serviced. The detectives exchanged glances. These details had not been in any official report. "Why wasn't any of this documented?" Reed asked. Marion smiled sadly. The hotel was trying to maintain its reputation. These complaints were handled discreetly. By the time they left Marion's apartment, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the city streets. They had more questions than answers, and the case was officially classified as unexplained phenomena, not quite closed, but no longer actively investigated. 6 months after the initial report, Detective Reed received a call from the Westbrook Hotel's current manager. During routine maintenance, workers had discovered something behind the wall between rooms 212 and 214, a sealed door, its outline barely visible beneath layers of wallpaper and paint. The construction crew removed a section of drywall to reveal the original door to room 213, still intact, its brass number plate tarnished but readable. With proper authorization, Reed and Chen supervised as the door was carefully opened. The room beyond was perfectly preserved, as though sealed in time. A layer of dust covered everything: the neatly made bed, a suitcase placed on the luggage rack, women's clothing hung in the closet. On the bathroom counter, cosmetics and toiletries were arranged in an orderly fashion. It was as if someone had stepped out momentarily, expecting to return. The items belonged to Emily Winters, the guest who had vanished in 1974. Yet despite the undisturbed state of the room, there was no trace of Emily herself. The mystery of her disappearance remained unsolved. Most disturbing of all was the discovery made by the forensics team. A small wooden box containing dozens of brass keys, all identical, all labeled 213, far more keys than would have been needed for normal hotel operations. To this day, the Westbrook Hotel occasionally receives reports from confused guests who insist they were given keys to room 213, a room that, according to the official floor plan, has never existed. Security cameras never capture these exchanges, and the front desk staff maintain they never issued such keys. The room itself has been resealed, the wall rebuilt, the original door locked away in police evidence. But sometimes, late at night, guests walking down that second-floor hallway report hearing soft movements from behind the wall between rooms 212 and 214, the sound of someone quietly unpacking a suitcase, preparing for a stay that never ends. The brass keys continue to appear, passed from unseen hands to unsuspecting guests, inviting them to a room that waits in a space between what is and what was a doorway to somewhere else that only certain people are chosen to find. Story 8, the small-town cemetery was quiet, peaceful, but as the groundskeeper made his rounds, he found something that made his blood run cold. A freshly dug grave, flowers neatly arranged, a headstone with a name he recognized his own. Raymond Miller had been tending to Elmwood Cemetery for 27 years. He knew every path, every tree, every headstone. The cemetery was his second home, a place where the silence spoke volumes to him. On that crisp October morning, the fog hung low between the stone markers, diffusing the early sunlight into a soft, golden haze. The dew-covered grass dampened the soles of his worn work boots as he made his methodical rounds. The east section was his first stop that morning. It wasn't scheduled for maintenance until the following day, but Raymond felt drawn to it. Perhaps it was the way the fog seemed thicker there, or maybe it was simply habit. Either way, his feet carried him through the narrow path between the oldest graves in Elmwood. That's when he saw it, a patch of disturbed earth that hadn't been there the day before. Fresh soil mounded in the precise shape of a grave. Atop the mound lay a careful arrangement of white lilies, still crisp and dewy. A small, temporary marker stood at the head of the grave. As Raymond approached, the fog seemed to part just enough to reveal the inscription: Raymond Miller, 1958-2024. His heart didn't race. Instead, it seemed to stop altogether, hanging suspended in his chest as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His own name, his own birth year, and a death date just 3 days in the future. Detective Sarah Keller arrived 40 minutes later. The sun had risen higher, burning away some of the fog, but a persistent mist still clung to the cemetery grounds. She found Raymond sitting on a nearby bench, his hands clasped tightly together, his gaze fixed on the mysterious grave. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice low and smooth as she approached. "I'm Detective Keller. Can you walk me through what happened this morning?" Raymond's account was precise, measured, the way a man speaks when he's trying to maintain his grip on reality. Detective Keller listened, jotting occasional notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. The scratch of her pen against paper provided a rhythmic counterpoint to Raymond's story. "Do you have any enemies, Mr. Miller?" she asked after he finished. "Anyone who might want to frighten you?" Raymond shook his head slowly. "I'm just the groundskeeper," he said. "I keep to myself, always have." Detective Keller knelt beside the grave, careful not to disturb the scene. The soil was dark and rich, recently turned, professional work, not the hasty digging of a prankster. She lifted one of the lilies, examining it, fresh cut, expensive, the kind sold at high-end florists, not the grocery store. "We'll need to verify what's in this grave," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but gentle. Raymond nodded, his eyes still fixed on his name etched into the marker. The exhumation took place that afternoon. The county coroner supervised as two officers carefully removed the soil. 6 feet down they found not a body but a sealed wooden box about 3 feet long. When opened, it contained a single item, a framed photograph of Raymond standing in front of his small house on Oak Street. The picture had been taken recently. He was wearing the new jacket his daughter had given him for his birthday last month. Back at the station, Detective Keller spread the evidence across her desk. The photograph, the marker with Raymond's name, a soil analysis that showed the dirt came from elsewhere, not the cemetery. The lilies traced to a florist in the neighboring town of Hartfield. "Someone went to a lot of trouble," said Officer Lopez, leaning against the doorframe of Keller's office. "Digging a grave, buying expensive flowers, creating a custom marker. That's dedication." "Or obsession," Keller replied, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "The question is, why Raymond Miller? Why a groundskeeper?" The investigation led Detective Keller to the florist in Hartfield the next morning. The shop was small but elegant, with the sweet, heavy scent of flowers hanging in the air. The owner, an elderly woman named Ruth Bellamy, remembered the order clearly. "White lilies 2 dozen," she said, adjusting her glasses as she looked through her order book. "Paid in cash. The gentleman was very specific about the arrangement." "Can you describe him?" Keller asked. "Tall, well-dressed, gray hair, I think. He had kind eyes." Ruth paused, thinking. "He mentioned something about them being for a tribute. I assumed a funeral." Detective Keller showed her Raymond's picture. Ruth shook her head. "No, not him. The man who bought the flowers was older, more distinguished looking." That evening, while Raymond stayed with his daughter for safety, Detective Keller returned to the cemetery. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grounds, transforming the peaceful landscape into something more somber. She walked the paths, trying to see the place through different eyes, not as a detective, but as someone who might harbor resentment toward the groundskeeper. As she approached the administration building, a small office at the cemetery's entrance, she noticed a light on inside. According to Raymond, no one should have been there at this hour. Detective Keller drew her weapon and approached cautiously. Through the window, she could see an elderly man sitting at the desk, calmly writing in what appeared to be a ledger. She recognized him immediately from old photographs on the wall. Former cemetery director Edward Winters, who had retired 5 years ago. The confrontation was quiet, almost cordial. Edward Winters didn't resist when Detective Keller entered. He simply closed the ledger and folded his hands on top of it. "I wondered when you'd come," he said, his voice soft but clear. The story emerged slowly, like water seeping from stone. Edward Winters had dedicated 50 years of his life to Elmwood Cemetery. It was his legacy, his life's work. When illness forced his retirement, he expected to be remembered, honored. Instead, Raymond Miller had methodically erased all traces of his influence, redesigning the gardens, changing the maintenance schedules, replacing the old record-keeping system with a digital one. "He buried my legacy," Winters said, his calm voice belying the intensity in his eyes. "So I thought it fitting to show him how it feels, to see your life's work, your identity, consigned to the earth." The date on the marker, October 23, 2024, was significant. It would have been Winters' 50th anniversary as cemetery director, a milestone he had once looked forward to celebrating. "I wasn't going to hurt him," Winters insisted. "The grave was symbolic, a reminder that we all face the same end, regardless of our accomplishments." When pressed about the photograph in the box, Winters's composure finally cracked. I wanted him to understand that I see him, that I know what he's done, that someone is watching as he dismantles my life's work. As Detective Keller drove Edward Winters to the station, the night settled fully over Elmwood Cemetery. The charges would be breaking and entering, trespassing, harassment, making threats, not attempted murder as they'd initially feared. 2 days later, Raymond Miller returned to work. The mysterious grave had been filled in, the marker removed, the site restored to its previous state, but something had changed. As he walked the familiar paths, Raymond found himself looking at the cemetery differently. Each grave represented not just a person, but a life with connections, influences, legacies that continued beyond death. In the administration building, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was Edward Winters's original landscaping plan for the cemetery, the one Raymond had replaced with his own. He spread it out on the desk, studying the careful notations, the thoughtful design elements. For the first time, he saw not just an outdated system to be improved upon, but the vision of a man who, like himself, had devoted his life to honoring the dead. The following spring, visitors to Elmwood Cemetery noticed new plantings throughout the grounds, flowering shrubs and ornamental trees placed according to a design created decades earlier. And in the southwest corner, a small memorial bench bore a simple plaque, honoring the legacy of Edward Winters, guardian of Elmwood, 1969-2019. Some legacies, it seemed, refused to stay buried. Story 9. The evening air hung heavy with September's lingering warmth as Emma Carson stepped out of Willow's grocery on Maple Street. The soft chime of the door's bell faded behind her, replaced by the gentle hum of streetlights flickering to life against the deepening twilight. A stranger held the door, his gesture so ordinary that Emma barely registered his face, just another polite shadow in the rhythm of her Tuesday routine. The paper bag in her arms crinkled softly as she walked, the sound accompanying her footsteps on the sidewalk. Her keys jingled in her coat pocket, a familiar melody that had escorted her home countless times before. The neighborhood wrapped around her in comfortable familiarity. The crooked mailbox at the corner, the house with wind chimes that sang with every gentle breeze, the cracked sidewalk she'd learned to step over without looking. Detective Marcus Rivera traced these same steps 3 days later, his worn leather notebook open in his hands. The pages whispered as he turned them, documenting the ordinary path that had somehow led to something extraordinary. His partner, Detective Lila Cowery, stood slightly apart, her gaze traveling the street as if the buildings themselves might offer testimony. She stopped for gas, Cowery said, her voice low and measured. Security footage shows her at Barton's gas station at 7:42 p.m. Rivera nodded, his pen scratching against paper. The timeline was beginning to take shape, but timelines only told when, not why. And in this case, the why hovered just beyond their grasp, a shadow they couldn't quite define. The gas station's fluorescent lights cast everything in a harsh glow on the recording. Emma stood by her car, the nozzle in her hand, her expression distracted, perhaps thinking about tomorrow's presentation or the call she needed to make to her mother. And there in the background, a figure leaned against a blue sedan, seemingly absorbed in his phone. The same man who had held the door, not looking at her but somehow oriented toward her, like a compass needle finding north. She didn't notice him, Rivera murmured, watching the footage for the third time. Not consciously, anyway. Cowery's eyes narrowed slightly, but something registered. Look at how she keeps checking her surroundings. In the video, Emma's gaze drifted, scanning the station with the casual vigilance that becomes second nature to women who walk alone. A subtle tension had crept into her shoulders, barely perceptible unless you were looking for it. The detective was looking for it. The Pine Ridge apartment complex stood 6 blocks from the gas station, a 3-story building of faded brick and narrow windows. The kind of place where neighbors recognized each other but rarely exchanged more than nods. Emma had lived there for 18 months. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the small, neglected courtyard where a single bench sat beneath a maple tree. The security camera in the lobby had captured her arrival at 8:17 p.m. She checked her mailbox, sorted through envelopes, discarded something that was probably a flyer, and behind her the glass door opened again. The same man now carrying a small paper bag similar to the one from the grocery store. He nodded to her as he passed, heading toward the stairwell. She paused, her hand still in the mailbox, watching him go. "This is where it changes," Rivera said, pausing the footage. "Look at her face, she's making the connection." Emma's expression had shifted from distraction to awareness, her eyes following the stranger with newfound attention. She closed her mailbox with deliberate slowness and waited until he had disappeared up the stairs before she followed, maintaining a careful distance. The hallway cameras showed her approach to her apartment, keys already in hand, movements quick and purposeful now. She glanced back twice before reaching her door, and then in a decision that would later haunt the investigation, she stopped, turned, retraced her steps to the stairwell and looked up. The man stood on the landing above, looking down at her. Neither spoke for what felt like minutes but was only seconds. Then Emma's voice, surprisingly steady, "Are you following me?" The footage had no audio, but the investigators had reconstructed this moment from her phone, which she had slipped from her pocket, and begun recording an instinct that spoke volumes about modern vigilance. "You asked me to follow you home," the man's voice had replied, calm and certain. "You just don't remember." Emma's laugh on the recording was sharp, disbelieving. "I've never seen you before today." "At the coffee shop," he said, "last Thursday. You were wearing a green scarf. You asked me to make sure you got home safely because you thought someone was watching you." The silence that followed held a weight the detectives could feel even through the recording. Emma's breath slightly quicker, the soft tap of her finger against the phone case. "I wasn't in town last Thursday," she finally said. "I was at a conference in Denver. I don't own a green scarf." The man's expression never changed in the hallway footage, no surprise, no concern, no flicker of doubt. He simply nodded as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "You're confused," he said, his voice still gentle on the recording. "It's understandable, but I promised I would help you, and I keep my promises." Detective Cowery set the phone down on the table between them. The recording paused. She called 911 after that. Officers arrived within 12 minutes. The man was still there, sitting on the stairs, completely calm. He had ID, a local address, no criminal record. Jason Mercer, 34, software developer at Tech Fusion for the past 6 years. Rivera flipped through the preliminary reports, and he maintained his story that she had asked for his help. Without variation, Cowery confirmed, even when confronted with her alibi, which checked out completely. Conference organizers confirmed her attendance. Her hotel key card showed regular use. Airport security has her on camera both departing and returning. She was definitely in Denver when he claims they met. The investigation spread outward from that point, meticulous and methodical. Jason Mercer's life unfolded before them in careful documentation, a quiet existence in a one-bedroom apartment 15 blocks away. colleagues who described him as reserved but reliable, no significant relationships, no history of mental illness, a digital footprint so ordinary it was almost suspicious in its blandness. Emma's life yielded similar results, ordinary in all the ways that mattered to the investigation. No connections to Mercer before that evening, no unexplained absences or behaviors that might suggest a dual life, no green scarf found among her belongings. "It doesn't make sense," Rivera said, spreading the photos across the desk. "He doesn't fit any profile we have. Not a stalker, not delusional in any other way. His therapy records show no history of fixations or fabricated relationships." "Yet he created an entire scenario," Cowery replied, tapping one photo still from the hallway camera, capturing the moment Emma confronted him. "Detailed enough to seem plausible, specific enough to be verifiably false." The interrogation room was painted a pale gray that absorbed sound and emotion in equal measure. Mercer sat with perfect posture, hands folded on the table, expression open and cooperative. He answered every question without hesitation. "I understand your confusion," he told them, his voice carrying the same gentle certainty it had on Emma's recording. "But I'm simply keeping a promise. She asked for help, and I'm helping." "The woman you followed was Emma Carson," Rivera said, sliding a photo across the table. "Do you recognize her?" Mercer glanced at the photo and nodded. Of course, though she looked different at the coffee shop, tired, frightened. "Mr. Mercer, Emma Carson was in Denver when you claim to have met her." A slight pause, the first hesitation they had seen from him. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely certain." Mercer considered this, his brow furrowing slightly. "Then she has a twin, or someone who looks remarkably like her used her name. Either way, I made a promise to someone who looked exactly like Emma Carson." The investigation continued for weeks, expanding to include security footage from every coffee shop within 20 miles. None showed Mercer and anyone resembling Emma together. His credit card statements showed no coffee purchases on the Thursday in question. His cell phone GPS placed him at his office, then his apartment nowhere near any coffee shop. Emma Carson requested a restraining order, which was granted immediately. Mercer accepted it without protest, assuring the judge that he had no intention of approaching her again. "The promise has been kept," he said simply. "She got home safely." The case file remained open but inactive, one of those mysteries that hovers at the edges of law enforcement, not quite criminal, not quite resolved. 3 months later, Detective Rivera was reviewing cold cases when an officer placed a manila envelope on his desk. "Found something you might want to see, sir." Inside was a single photograph from a traffic camera 2 blocks from Emma's apartment building. It showed a woman with Emma's height and build, wearing a green scarf that obscured much of her face, walking beside a man whose profile matched Jason Mercer's. The timestamp showed Thursday, 9:17 p.m., while Emma Carson was documented to be in Denver. Rivera stared at the image, the soft ticking of the wall clock suddenly loud in the quiet office. He reached for his phone, then hesitated, his hand hovering over the receiver. The woman's face was turned away from the camera, the green scarf catching the streetlight. It could be anyone, he told himself. A coincidence. A similar height and build was hardly definitive. He slipped the photo back into the envelope. Some questions he had learned over years of detective work lead only to more questions, deepening the mystery rather than resolving it. Sometimes the truth lies not in answers, but in the spaces between them, in the possibilities that remain when all logical explanations have been exhausted. The file on Jason Mercer and Emma Carson remains open to this day, a thin folder in a drawer of unsolved mysteries. Sometimes, late at night when the precinct is quiet, Rivera takes it out and studies the traffic camera photo again. The woman in the green scarf, the man beside her, the promise kept for reasons no one has been able to explain. And somewhere in the city, a woman who looks exactly like Emma Carson walks home, her green scarf bright against the evening shadows, while someone follows at a careful distance, protecting her from dangers only she can see. Story 10, the mysterious package arrived without a trace of its origin. No return label, no tracking number, just a damp cardboard box hinting at secrets hidden within. Sarah Miller hesitated, the unfamiliar name on the package stirring her curiosity. The weight of the unknown pressed against her as she unraveled the tape, revealing a solitary VHS tape and a simple note, "Watch alone." In the quiet of her kitchen, Sarah held the black plastic cassette, feeling its significance in her hands. The tape seemed to whisper of forbidden knowledge, its worn edges telling stories untold. The note, scribbled urgently, hinted at a truth waiting to be uncovered. As Sarah hesitated, the world outside carried on its usual rhythm the distant bark of a dog, the laughter of children, the drone of a lawnmower. Oblivious to the enigma that had entered her life, she brought the package inside, setting it down with a mix of unease and fascination. The name Daniel Whitaker meant nothing to her, a stranger's identity crossing paths with hers in an unexpected twist of fate. The tape beckoned to her, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Against her instincts, she inserted it into her old VCR. Static danced on the screen before sharpening into focus a dimly lit room, a man with haunted eyes, his voice steady yet burdened. "My name is Daniel Whitaker," he began, his words carrying the weight of a life appended. "If you're watching this, someone found you, which means they'll find me too." The man's story unfolded, a tale of innocence tarnished by circumstance. Accusations of a crime he didn't commit, evidence twisted against him, a life torn apart by forces beyond his control. Sarah watched, captivated by the unfolding drama, the truth veiled in shadows. Detective Eliza Ramirez found herself entangled in the web of mystery surrounding Daniel Whitaker. Tapes appearing, each revealing a layer of deception, a thread leading to a truth too dark to ignore. The case of Catherine Walsh's murder took on new dimensions, complexities that defied easy answers. As Ramirez delved deeper, she uncovered a web of deceit surrounding Walsh's involvement in a whistleblower case against a powerful pharmaceutical company. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, revealing a sinister plot to silence the truth at any cost. Sarah received a second package, a trove of evidence that shattered illusions and unveiled a conspiracy. Documents exposing corruption, proof of innocence buried beneath layers of deception. The truth, once hidden, now laid bare for all to see. With each revelation, the case unraveled, leading to a reckoning long overdue. Whitaker's innocence proven, the real culprits unmasked, justice prevailed in the face of overwhelming odds. The darkness lifted, revealing a glimmer of hope in a world tainted by lies. Sarah and Whitaker crossed paths once more, reflections of a shared journey through shadows and light. The wrong address, a twist of fate that brought them together, forging a bond born of truth and trust. In the end, as the VHS tapes found their place in evidence, they stood as testaments to the power of curiosity, the bravery to seek the unknown. The truth, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to open their hearts to the mysteries of life. Story 11. The river flowed lazily that morning, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the early light. The fisherman, lost in his thoughts, almost missed the sight of a lone suitcase drifting near the shore. At first glance, it appeared like a discarded heap of old garments, but as he ventured closer, a pungent odor filled the air, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. The case was secured with chains, its edges corroded by time and exposure to the elements. When the authorities pried it open, they were met with a chilling sight: not clothes, but strands of hair, fingers frozen in a haunting grip. And at the bottom, a cryptic note that sent shivers down their spines: "This isn't the first." Detective Sarah Mercer arrived at the scene, her composed demeanor hiding the unease that gnawed at her insides. The victim, a woman in her mid-30s with dark locks and pallid skin now marred by the water, lay before them. The medical examiner worked meticulously, recording every detail before the body was respectfully taken away. What struck Mercer was not just the manner of disposal, but the eerie care taken in presenting the victim: manicured nails, freshly styled hair, clad in expensive attire. It wasn't a hasty act, Mercer observed quietly, her gaze fixed on the gentle lapping of the water against the muddy bank. She was prepared, almost showcased. The victim was soon identified as Catherine Walsh, a successful real estate agent renowned for her expertise in selling upscale properties. Divorced, childless, she led a solitary life in an affluent neighborhood. Colleagues painted a picture of a driven, detail-oriented woman, fiercely private in her personal affairs. Her disappearance was reported by her assistant, who stressed how out of character it was for Catherine to miss a crucial showing with potential high-profile clients. She wouldn't have missed that for anything, the assistant insisted, her voice tinged with worry. That sale was set to be her biggest yet. As investigators delved into Walsh's meticulously kept modern home, a sense of unease settled over them. Everything was immaculate to the point of being unnerving: designer furniture meticulously arranged, not a speck of dust in sight. The fridge held neatly arranged meals, labeled by day, while the closet boasted a color-coordinated display of clothing and shoes stored in protective covers. However, a single detail stood out: a slightly ajar drawer in her home office. Within that drawer, a leather-bound journal was discovered. The final entry sent a chill down Mercer's spine. He's watching again. Same car, different plates. A digital trail unveiled a series of unsettling emails in Walsh's inbox: messages from unknown senders, all echoing the same phrase: "I see your perfection," all time-stamped at the exact same moment across different days. Her internet history revealed searches for security systems and self-defense tools, hinting at a growing sense of unease. Mercer pieced together these clues, drawing a connection between the meticulous staging of the crime scene and the eerie emails. "Our perpetrator is methodical," she confided in her partner. "This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a carefully orchestrated ritual." A breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source. A local pawn shop owner recognized a distinct emerald necklace that belonged to Walsh. The man who had pawned it was a regular customer: Michael Linden, an unassuming maintenance worker. Surveillance footage revealed Linden's frequent visits to Walsh's building, sometimes with his maintenance cart, other times without, always during moments when she was away, showcasing properties. A search of Linden's humble abode unearthed a chilling collection: walls adorned with photographs of Walsh and other women, all bearing a striking resemblance, all captured without their knowledge. Some images were ominously crossed out in red ink. Walsh was just one of a series. Concealed behind a false panel in his closet, investigators uncovered a shrine of sorts. Personal items belonging to each victim were meticulously arranged, a hairbrush with strands of hair, tissues imprinted with lipstick, keys, and receipts. Each set accompanied by a detailed notebook chronicling their daily routines, preferences, and habits. The interrogation room turned frigid as Lyndon was brought in for questioning. His outward appearance belied the darkness within, his voice devoid of emotion as he finally spoke. "They were flawed," he declared flatly. "They presented a facade of perfection, but I saw through it. Catherine, her desk drawer was always in disarray. She missed a spot when applying lipstick. Her perfection was a facade." The search for the other victims mentioned in Lyndon's note led investigators to remote locations where 2 more suitcases were discovered. Each contained a woman bearing a striking resemblance to Walsh, both real estate agents known for their meticulous attention to detail. During the trial, Lyndon remained stoic, his gaze fixed ahead as prosecutors unraveled his meticulous methods. He had stalked each woman methodically, learning their lives, infiltrating their homes, and ultimately correcting what he perceived as imperfections before taking their lives. As the judge pronounced a life sentence without parole, the families of the victims sat in silent grief, grappling with the horror of it all. For Detective Mercer, the case was officially closed, yet a haunting question lingered in her mind. What drove Lyndon to fixate on these women, to seek out and eradicate perceived flaws in such a macabre manner? What inner demons propelled him to such monstrous acts? The river continued its serene journey downstream, carrying away all traces of the grim discovery. But in the quiet of the precinct, on Mercer's desk, lay copies of those chilling notebooks, a stark reminder that behind the facades of ordinary lives, darkness can lurk, concealed from view, and in the shadows, the most insidious predators may lie in wait, watching, biding their time for a single crack in the veneer to reveal itself. Story 12: The Mysterious Discovery in the Attic. The ancient box lay hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten memories, tucked away in the attic of the old house. Among the clutter of bygone years, it held a collection of faded Polaroids, capturing moments of joy and celebration. Each picture whispered tales of birthdays and family gatherings, innocent and familiar, until one image shattered the tranquility. In the last photograph, taken in her very own living room, a family unknown to Rebecca sat together on the familiar couch, bathed in the soft glow of the room. Yet in the shadows behind them lurked a figure, barely visible but unmistakably present, a man watching from the hallway, his gaze piercing through the dimness. A chill danced along Rebecca's spine as she scrutinized the eerie photograph, her fingers quivering ever so slightly, causing the edges of the Polaroid to tremble. The family in the picture, a woman with golden locks, a man with thick-rimmed glasses, and 2 children, smiled obliviously at the camera, unaware of the danger looming just beyond their sight. Descending the creaking wooden stairs, Rebecca carried the unsettling image to the kitchen, where she placed it under the harsh glare of the fluorescent light. The resemblance between her home and the one captured in the photo was uncanny. The archway, the crown molding, the bay window all mirrored her own house, yet the faces in the picture remained strangers. Enter Detective Morgan, clad in a weathered leather jacket that whispered of untold mysteries. With eyes that missed no detail, he examined the photograph methodically, his gloved finger tracing the faded edges before flipping it to reveal a blank back. In a voice like a low rumble, he inquired about the previous owners, the Nelsons, and their departure, prompting Rebecca to confess her lack of knowledge about them. Taking the photograph into his possession, Detective Morgan delved into the investigation, piecing together the puzzle of the house's enigmatic past. The trail led back through a succession of families, the Nelsons, the Crawfords, the Mornos, each occupying the house for a brief period before vanishing without a trace. A breakthrough emerged when a former mail carrier identified the family in the photo as the Sutherlands, who had resided in the house for a mere year before disappearing mysteriously. As the investigation deepened, forensic analysis dated the photograph to 15 years prior, unveiling eerie details that hinted at a staged setup and a hidden presence in the hallway. Enhanced imaging illuminated the shadowy figure's features, a tall, male silhouette cloaked in darkness, his gaze fixed and unyielding. A pattern emerged as Detective Morgan unraveled the sinister history of the house, revealing a string of families who had all vanished after precisely 1 year of residence. Delving further into the past, the detective uncovered the origins of the house, built by a renowned architect with a shadowy past. Samuel Whitfield, the project manager who had mysteriously disappeared, emerged as a key figure, his likeness hauntingly resembling the figure in the photograph. The investigation took a grim turn as the basement yielded macabre secrets buried beneath layers of concrete and soil, the preserved remains of the missing families, each frozen in time, surrounded by eerie photographs capturing their unsuspecting moments, a grim testament to their tragic fate. Amidst the unfolding horrors, a hidden crawlspace in the attic revealed a chilling discovery, a makeshift living space, a journal filled with chilling observations, and a foreboding entry hinting at a newfound target. Fearing for her safety, Rebecca sought refuge under police protection, only to be haunted by mysterious calls in the dead of night and the ominous click of a camera capturing her every move. As the investigation lingered on, the house stood silent, its secrets shrouded in darkness, its former inhabitants lost to the shadows. The enigma of Samuel Whitfield persisted, his presence a spectral whisper in the empty rooms, his legacy a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within the walls. And so, the tale of the man in the photograph continued to unfold, a haunting mystery that defied explanation, leaving those who sought the truth ensnared in a web of shadows and unseen watchers, lost to the depths of a house that held secrets beyond imagining. Story 13. In the beginning, there was a mere flicker, a fleeting anomaly in the baby monitor's transmission. The mother brushed it off as mere static interference, irrational thoughts in the late hours of the night. But then the crackling of audio pierced through the silence, and a voice, soft and eerie, whispered, "SHHH, go back to sleep." A chill ran down her spine, her entire being seized by a sense of dread. Racing towards her son's room, her heart thundering in her chest, she found the crib empty. The window tightly shut, the door securely locked. The only anomaly, a plush rabbit lying on the floor, its unblinking black eyes fixed upon her. When questioned later, Rebecca recounted how she screamed until her voice turned raw, her anguish echoing through the walls. The neighbors, disturbed by her cries, dialed emergency services, summoning help to her doorstep. Upon arrival, the authorities discovered Rebecca cradling the stuffed rabbit, her body swaying back and forth on the nursery floor, lost in a world of despair. Samuel, her 4-month-old infant, had vanished without a trace. The investigation unfolded with little to grasp onto. No signs of forced entry, no alarms triggered. The baby monitor footage, the sole witness to the mysterious events, showed nothing amiss until the voice and static disrupted the night's tranquility. How could a trespasser slip into a locked abode, snatch a child, and vanish without a trace save for a displaced toy? Suspicion turned towards Rebecca. Her estranged husband, Daniel, away on business, added fuel to the speculations. their strained marriage, Rebecca's battles with postpartum depression, all painted a grim picture. A breakthrough came when fibers, foreign to the household, were discovered on the nursery windowsill, tiny clues leading to the possibility of an intruder scaling the walls from outside. Security footage from the neighbors unveiled a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness that fateful night. A boot print in the garden soil hinted at a skilled individual, perhaps with military or climbing expertise. Rebecca's innocence began to surface as Daniel returned, bewildered and distraught. Unusual calluses on his hands, a newfound interest in rock climbing, and financial discrepancies raised red flags. A life insurance policy, secret calls, a hidden second family. Daniel's facade crumbled under scrutiny. The investigation pivoted towards the baby monitor, a gateway to the truth. Forensics uncovered a breach, a digital infiltration that manipulated the device. The haunting voice not from within the nursery, but a remote intrusion into their lives. The trail led to a basement where Samuel was found, tended to by a woman named Elaine. Her vacant eyes held untold stories as she was apprehended. A past entwined with Daniel's, a tragic loss driving her actions. Daniel's guilt unraveled through encrypted messages, climbing gear, and a cough captured in the monitor's audio. In the courtroom, silence reigned as the monitor's chilling playback echoed through the halls, sealing their fate. Daniel and Elaine, convicted on all counts, faced the consequences of their deception. Rebecca and Samuel retreated to heal, leaving behind the shadows of the past. The case reshaped investigations, a cautionary tale of technology's dark underbelly. Samuel, oblivious to his own tale, carried on, shielded from the horrors of that night. The rabbit, a silent witness locked away, a reminder of the truth that unfolded in the whispers of the monitor, truth cloaked in darkness, waiting to be unveiled. Story 14. The realtor's listing made no mention of a basement. The blueprints held no trace of it. Yet beneath the old carpet, a door lay hidden, its rusted handle a weighty secret. With effort, the family pried it open, releasing a rush of stale air thick with the scent of damp earth. Descending the steps into the darkness, they expected storage, but found a solitary chair under a swaying light bulb, and on the wall behind it, a series of photographs of them. Images captured from within the confines of their own home. The Mercer family had settled into the suburban property amidst winter's early darkness and the skeletal silhouettes of trees. The two-story structure, with its weathered siding and creaking floors, had whispered promises of character and history. However, the depth of the house's past and its chilling connection to the present had eluded their expectations. Detective Sarah Connors arrived at the property alongside her partner, the crime scene shrouded in yellow tape as the forensic team worked diligently. Mrs. Mercer's trembling voice had relayed the unsettling discovery beneath their living room floor, prompting Connors to take charge, ensuring every detail was documented before further exploration. The basement, akin to a standard bedroom in size, exuded an aura of mystery with its concrete walls painted a somber gray. A solitary chair anchored to the floor, a bare bulb casting shadows that danced eerily around the room. Yet it was the wall of photographs that captured the detective's attention, 37 images meticulously arranged in a timeline. As they delved deeper into the investigation, the absence of forced entry and stolen possessions baffled the team. Privacy had been invaded, safety shattered, leaving the Mercers and their predecessors vulnerable to an unseen intruder's scrutiny. Interviews with past owners unraveled a tapestry of deceit and obscured truths surrounding the property's history. Blueprints altered, permits withdrawn, and inspection reports censored hinted at a sinister presence lurking within the house's walls. A pivotal breakthrough arose during a conversation with the contractor responsible for the house's renovation. His denial of the existence of a basement clashed with the tangible evidence before them, casting a shadow of doubt on the property's very foundation. Digital forensics unveiled an unsettling reality as hidden cameras and audio recordings painted a picture of uninvited surveillance spanning generations of unsuspecting families. The perpetrator, identified as Edward Kelvin, the house's enigmatic builder, had vanished from public records, his presence relegated to the shadows of his clandestine operation. The discovery of a hidden monitoring station and a journal brimming with intricate observations solidified Kelvin's reign of terror. His delusions painted the families as mere actors in his twisted narrative, subjects to be studied and documented from the hidden recesses of their supposed sanctuary. A 3-day manhunt culminated in Kelvin's discovery within the labyrinth of walls he had crafted, a frail figure consumed by his illusions of ownership and guardianship over the house's inhabitants. Despite the chilling revelations, his conviction bore no semblance of remorse, his detachment from reality a stark reminder of the darkness that had permeated the once hallowed halls. The Mercer family's departure marked the end of an era, leaving a trail of shattered illusions and lingering unease in their wake. The house, a monument to Kelvin's voyeuristic obsession, met its demise, yet its echoes lingered in the hearts of those who had unknowingly danced to his tune. The trial's closure brought little solace to the families left to grapple with the aftermath of Kelvin's intrusion, their sense of security forever tarnished by the realization that they had never been truly alone within the confines of their home. The walls, once guardians of their privacy, now stood as silent witnesses to a tale of betrayal and invasion, a reminder that some shadows are never truly dispelled. Story 15, the ancient library faced its fate of destruction. Workers toiled tirelessly until an unexpected discovery halted their progress. A hidden latch concealed within the depths of a bookshelf was accidentally triggered, revealing a secret passage leading to a forgotten chamber. The air within was heavy, stagnant with the passage of time. The room was bare, save for a solitary chair at its center, firmly anchored to the floor. Etched repeatedly on the walls, a haunting message echoed, "I am still here." The foreman, sensing unease, contacted the authorities. What began as a routine demolition swiftly unraveled into a chilling mystery. Detective Morgan Walsh, a seasoned investigator, stood at the threshold of the hidden room, his flashlight piercing the darkness, unveiling the cryptic message scrawled across the walls. "Secure the area," Walsh commanded, his voice resonating in the confined space. "No one disturbs a thing until forensics arrives." The library's history whispered tales of intrigue. Once owned by the influential Harrington family, the building had been gifted to the public following the mysterious disappearance of their daughter, Rebecca. Vanishing without a trace during her final year of college, Rebecca's fate remained shrouded in uncertainty. Despite extensive searches, her whereabouts eluded discovery, leaving behind only a car abandoned near the woods. The prevailing belief hinted at a voluntary departure, yet her family clung to the belief of a darker truth. As forensic experts delved into the hidden room, a chilling revelation emerged. Traces of hair and fibers clung to the ancient chair, while the walls bore remnants of blood and skin cells beneath the layers of neglect. Analysis hinted at a young female presence, suggesting a grim struggle within the confines of the chamber. "This chair was meant for confinement," the analyst remarked, pointing to aged leather straps and bolted restraints. Detective Walsh, propelled by an unsettling curiosity, delved into the Harrington family's past. An unsettling revelation emerged: the library's renovation coincided eerily with Rebecca's disappearance, hinting at a connection. Further inquiries exposed a troubling fact. The concealed chamber had been crafted by a contractor exclusively hired by Maxwell Harrington, Rebecca's uncle, and the family's patriarch. Financial records unveiled exorbitant payments far exceeding standard renovations. Interviews with former library staff unveiled a shroud of secrecy. Maxwell's solitary visits to the untouched section after hours had gone unnoticed, dismissed as a love for solitude and history preservation. A meticulous librarian recalled Maxwell's insistence on preserving the area, claiming historical significance as his shield. The investigation escalated as DNA results intertwined Rebecca's fate with the hidden room. A chilling truth unfurled: Rebecca had not fled, but had been ensnared behind the bookshelf, potentially by her own kin. A warrant-granted entry into the Harrington estate unearthed a damning discovery: a journal hidden within Maxwell's study. Its pages bared a disturbing obsession, culminating in a harrowing admission: she knew too much. The room will silence her. Maxwell, now residing in seclusion, faced interrogation. Initially stoic, his resolve crumbled in the face of damning evidence. She threatened everything, he confessed, devoid of remorse. Rebecca's fate was sealed when she stumbled upon his embezzlement scheme, tarnishing the family legacy. In a moment of panic, he silenced her, entombing her beneath the hidden chamber and concealing the truth. Beneath the floorboards, Rebecca's remains were unearthed, adorned with a silver bracelet, a poignant relic from her past. Maxwell faced his reckoning as justice prevailed in a courtroom heavy with grief. The library, once slated for demolition, stood as a memorial to a life unjustly taken. Locals adorned its entrance with flowers, a tribute to a lost soul now found. In a haunting echo of the past, Rebecca's final plea, "I am still here," etched on the walls, resonated with a poignant truth. Her legacy endured, a testament to a life extinguished too soon, awaiting the solace of justice and the solace of rest. Story 16. The quaint old apartment held secrets within its walls: pipes that whispered, floorboards that murmured. But the new tenant, Sarah, sensed a difference in the sounds that echoed through the dim corridors. The footsteps above her were too precise, too deliberate for a building settling into the night's embrace. Each night, like a haunting melody, they traversed the ceiling with a measured cadence, a silent dance of unknown origin. Sarah, perched on the top floor, felt the weight of those unseen steps pressing down on her solitude. One evening, a surge of courage propelled Sarah to reach up with a broomstick and tap the ceiling in defiance of the mysterious rhythm. The world hushed, anticipation hung in the air like a heavy fog. Then a solitary knock reverberated from within the confines of the ceiling itself. A shiver crept down Sarah's spine, but she willed herself to believe it was mere coincidence, a trick of the aging building's bones. As the nights unfurled their dark tapestries, the footsteps persisted, a ghostly echo of a presence unknown. Sarah adapted, cocooning herself in the hum of the television, the solace of headphones that drowned out the silent footfalls tracing invisible paths above her head. Detective Morris's world intersected with Sarah's when a maintenance worker stumbled upon a hidden passage during routine repairs near Sarah's apartment. Behind a veil of drywall, a clandestine space emerged, a hushed sanctuary that defied the building's blueprints. Illuminated by a solitary beam of light, this secret chamber held relics of a life lived in silence: discarded wrappers, empty bottles, a tattered blanket, and a weathered notebook that whispered untold stories. The notebook unveiled a chilling tableau of Sarah's existence, meticulously chronicled her every move, her visitors, her daily rituals captured in ink. The script, once pristine, spiraled into a frenzy of erratic symbols, a cryptic language of obsession. The subject resists my gaze, the final entry lamented. She dares to defy me, none can ignore me. Forensics unearthed enigmatic fingerprints, a labyrinthine network of hidden passages woven into the building's skeleton, tendrils of secrecy reaching through time. These passages intertwined with the lives of past inhabitants, converging upon Sarah's dwelling, the epicenter of a malevolent, watchful eye. Residents past and present whispered tales of unease, of unseen eyes that lingered in the shadows, of whispers carried on the wind. A silent terror cloaked in the guise of everyday noises. The truth unraveled when microscopic droplets of blood whispered a name from the past Martin Weaver, a ghostly figure from years gone by. The enigma deepened as Detective Morris delved into Martin's disappearance, a specter haunted by the echoes of a man named Edward, a recluse who sought solace in silence. With each revelation, Edward's shadow loomed larger, a phantom orchestrating a symphony of fear from the shadows. A trail of breadcrumbs led investigators to Edward's lair, a secluded cabin adorned with fragments of lives observed, lives consumed by his insatiable hunger for control. Missing persons reports adorn the walls, a macabre tapestry woven from the threads of vanished souls. The whispers of the past grew into a cacophony of dread as the truth clawed its way to the surface. As the darkness of Edward's deeds unfurled, a chilling reality emerged, a reality where Sarah's fate remained suspended in the balance, a pawn in a game of shadows and silence. The manhunt for Edward, now known as Edward Mercer, rages on, a hunt for a phantom who vanished into the night. Detective Morris, haunted by the specter of Sarah's empty apartment, lingers in the shadows of his own home, a silent sentinel listening to the echoes of footsteps that may never come. In the stillness of the night, as the world slumbers, he gazes upward, wondering who else may be listening in the darkness, waiting for their moment to strike. Story 17, The Nursery Whispers. She yearned to refresh the nursery before the little one's arrival. The walls wore a faded blue, a hue that whispered tales of bygone days. With each stroke of white paint, a hidden secret emerged, letters faint at first, then sharpening into focus. A message etched beneath the surface. Don't let it hear you. Her breath hitched. Stepping back, her gaze fell upon them, tiny handprints imprinted in the fresh paint, too high for a child's reach. The revelation within the nursery of the Morgan homestead signaled the start of what investigators later dubbed the Whispering House case. The young couple had acquired the Victorian residence at an unbelievably low cost, unaware of its shadowed past. Detective Sarah Klein arrived, notepad poised. A woman, her belly swollen with child, answered the door, clad in paint-stained overalls. Weariness marked her eyes, sleep a distant memory. As she recounted finding the message and handprints, her hands quivered. The prior owners vanished overnight, she divulged. Neighbors claimed they fled in the dead of night, leaving with only essentials in tow. Traversing the historic dwelling, Detective Klein's footsteps echoed on aged floorboards. In the nursery, she scrutinized the partially painted wall, the message still visible amidst the abandoned paint job. Beside it, 5 small handprints adorned the wet paint, positioned at an adult's shoulder level. Back at the precinct, the detective delved into property records. The house had changed hands frequently over 3 decades, each family stay brief. More unsettling were the reports of child welfare issues filed for 3 of those families. Children spoke of whispers from the walls and a sense of being watched as they slumbered. Digging further, the detective unearthed construction blueprints and historical accounts. The house had once belonged to a leaner Blackwood, a childless widow who ran an orphanage on the premises during the industrial era. Articles mentioned 5 children who had vanished from her care, presumed to have fled. Upon Aliner's passing, renovators discovered a hidden chamber behind the nursery wall. Inside lay children's belongings, tiny shoes, toys, and garments, but no remains. The mystery had been shelved, forgotten in dusty archives. Interviewing former occupants, Detective Klein pieced together a chilling narrative. Each family with children reported eerie incidents, toys rearranged overnight, childish laughter echoing in empty corridors, and crayon drawings appearing mysteriously. Most dismissed these happenings until the writings surfaced. The message varied slightly: don't let them find you, don't make a sound, don't let it hear you. Always the same script, always unveiled during nursery repaints. A forensic linguist compared the writing to Aliner Blackwood's journals, confirming the match. More unnerving were the handprints, unchanged in size and placement across generations, despite different children dwelling in the home. The investigation took a dark turn when the detective secured permission for ground-penetrating radar in the basement. Anomalies in the readings pointed to 5 distinct shapes beneath the concrete floor, each child-sized. Breaking through, workers uncovered a grim truth. 5 sets of remains arranged in a circle. Forensic analysis indicated the children had perished during Aliner's tenure. Each child bore a pendant engraved with their name, the 5 orphans who had allegedly fled. Luminol sprayed throughout the nursery revealed glowing handprints on every wall, hidden beneath layers of paint, unseen by the naked eye. Countless handprints at varying heights, as if the children had sought escape. Aliner's journals, retrieved from county archives, unveiled her twisted beliefs. She saw orphaned children as vessels of special energy, sealing them away in hopes of extending her own life. The children had etched warnings into the walls, imploring future occupants to uncover their fate. With the victims laid to rest, justice prevailed. Their names were no longer lost to time, recognized as victims of foul play. The house remained vacant, the expectant couple refusing to return even for their belongings. Detective Klein submitted her final report, documenting the luminol-lit handprints and hidden message. Though justice was served, an enigma lingered within those walls, a presence that transcended paint and years. The nursery walls were raised during cleanup, yet workers claimed to hear children's whispers amid the rubble. None dared return after dark. The house met condemnation, another chilling case sealed in archives, a testament to closure yet unanswered spiritual queries. A snapshot lingered with the detective, 5 glowing handprints in the dark, a poignant reminder that some sins cast shadows too deep for paint to conceal. Story 18: The Enigmatic Victorian. She crossed the threshold into the abandoned Victorian, the air heavy with dust dancing in the stillness. The house stood frozen in time, its walls shedding layers of paint, furniture cloaked in ghostly sheets. Each step she took felt like a journey into a forgotten era, yet within this eerie stillness, a peculiar mystery awaited her. Doors, numerous and silent, beckoned her with their enigmatic allure. But no matter which one she chose, each passage led her back to the same parlor, as if trapped in a loop of never-ending corridors. The only escape lay in retracing her path, yet when she turned, the front door had vanished, leaving her stranded in a labyrinth of shadows. The revelation of Morgan Pierce's lifeless form transformed the once abandoned house from a mere relic to a scene of intrigue. Detective Sarah Lind lingered at the threshold, observing as forensic experts moved stealthily through the dim interiors, their presence akin to spectral whispers in the air. The house had garnered a reputation among locals, a place where compasses lost their way, where whispers of unseen eyes watching sent shivers down spines. Now, beneath its aging facade, lay secrets darker than the tales whispered in hushed tones. The initial examination suggests a passing of approximately 3 days, the medical examiner murmured, his words barely breaking the heavy silence. The cause appears to be asphyxiation. Morgan had been discovered seated in a vintage chair within the parlor, her posture serene, hands clasped neatly in her lap, as if awaiting a guest who would never arrive. No signs of struggle marred the scene, no marks of resistance. The stillness that enveloped the room unsettled even the most seasoned investigators, a quietude pregnant with unanswered questions. "Who stumbled upon the body?" Lind inquired, her gaze fixed on the notes before her. "A real estate agent showing the property to prospective buyers," her partner replied. They entered, saw her presence, mistaking her for an intruder until closer inspection revealed the truth. The house had remained uninhabited since the passing of its previous owner, Eleanor Blackwood, a tale of familial discord that left the estate neglected, unwanted, a fading memory in the minds of many. Morgan Pierce, a young scholar of 26, delved into the realm of architectural anomalies for her thesis, drawn to spaces that defied the norms of design. Her friends spoke of her meticulous nature, her unyielding ambition, and her fascination with structures that challenged perception. The abandoned Victorian, with its reputation for ensnaring visitors in its enigmatic embrace, would have undoubtedly piqued her scholarly curiosity. Her roommate reported her absence 2 days prior, Lind noted, tracing the details of the investigation. Morgan spoke of visiting the house where wanderers are lost in pursuit of her research. As the layers of Morgan's interactions with the house unraveled, a tapestry of peculiar occurrences emerged. Her journal entries chronicled peculiar acoustics, chilling drafts that defied explanation, and doors that led to ever-shifting chambers with each opening. In her final musings, she hinted at bringing specialized tools to capture what she termed spatial enigmas, tools that remained elusive in the wake of her demise. The autopsy unveiled an unexpected twist, a trace presence of a rare alkaloid in Morgan's system, a substance derived from plants used in rituals of ancient lore. Though capable of inducing disorientation and vivid illusions, the dosage found was insufficient to claim a life. Morgan steered clear of recreational indulgences, her partner affirmed in defense of her character. Her dedication to her craft was unwavering. She wouldn't have jeopardized her faculties willingly. Digital traces on Morgan's device unveiled fragments of conversations erased from sight, dialogues shared with a confidant who shared her intrigue for the enigmatic property. Their exchanges grew intimate, veiled in cryptic allusions to the house's hidden truths. "The house harbors memories of ages past," one message hinted. "It yearns to impart its secrets to a willing soul." In the shadows of their discourse lay the seeds of a revelation that beckoned the curious and the brave. The trail of investigation led Lind to Adam Reeves, an expert in architectural history who had engaged in discourse with Morgan. His knowledge of rare spatial anomalies had captivated her scholarly pursuits, blurring the lines between professional intrigue and personal connection. Reeves, when questioned, bore the weight of sorrow for Morgan's loss, his eyes betraying a profound sense of bewilderment. "The house is more than mere legend," he divulged. "Its original architect wove illusions and distortions into its very fabric, crafting a realm of confusion and disorientation." Morgan sensed a deeper truth within its walls, a truth that transcended mere artifice. Yet Reeves stood alibied for the window of Morgan's passing, captured on camera, delivering a lecture miles away from the scene of her enigmatic demise. A breakthrough, unexpected and illuminating, emerged from a distant source, a grandson of Eleanor Blackwood, residing in a far-off land. Contacted by authorities, he unveiled a family secret buried beneath layers of time. "My grandmother was not the sole Blackwood to meet her fate within those walls," he confessed. Generations bore witness to a phenomenon known as the claiming, each soul discovered in the parlor, each visage calm in repose. He shared journals chronicling a legacy of deaths veiled as natural occurrences, a legacy steeped in shadows of an unseen influence. A secondary sweep of the property unveiled a concealed chamber behind the parlor's hearth, a chamber that cradled Morgan's missing instruments alongside relics from ancient cultures, arranged in a mosaic of forgotten wisdom. At its heart lay a figurine, aged by time and touched by countless hands, embodying a deity linked to the thresholds that bridge worlds. Traces of the alkaloid coating the artifacts echoed the presence of the substance within Morgan's veins, a connection woven across ages and realms. The narrative took a chilling turn as forensic analysis unveiled the presence of an unknown figure within the house at the time of Morgan's passing. Partial prints, alien to Morgan's or any documented visitor, lingered on doorknobs like whispers of a phantom presence. 3 weeks into the inquiry, Adam Reeves met a fate mirroring Morgan's own, a silent sentinel in his abode, the alkaloid staining his essence, a key clutched in his grip that unlocked secrets shrouded in the heart of the Victorian. In a final missive to himself, preserved as a testament to a truth unearthed, Reeves inscribed, "The house does not bind you physically, it ensnares your perceptions." Morgan's insight was keen. The doors laid where they always have, yet an illusion of circular paths clouds the truth. Once awareness dawns, escape is but a step away. Alas, by then, departure holds no allure. The case, etched in shadows and enigmas, lingered in a state of unresolved mystery, marked by a confluence of inexplicable events and unanswered queries. The Victorian, now shrouded in condemnation and barred to all but official gaze, whispered tales of spectral lights that danced within its confines on moonlit nights, of visitors who ventured in but never found their way out. Whispers among the townsfolk spoke of a house that claimed those who dared to unravel its enigmatic tapestry, while others theorized that Morgan and Reeves had brushed against a force ancient and potent, residing in the interstices of reality as we know it. The truth eluded grasp, akin to an exit concealed within a maze of endless corridors, in a house where all doors led back to the beginning beckoning, yet forbidding escape. Story 19, the town's whispers never touched upon the house nestled at the edge of the woods. It stood silent and solitary, its windows veiled in darkness, its porch weary under the weight of time's passage. Nobody laid claim to it, and the memory of its builder had faded into the mist of forgotten tales. Yet when a band of wanderers strayed too close, they stumbled upon a peculiar sight, names etched into the wooden siding, carved deep as solemn warnings. And at the end of the list, pristine and untouched, was a name unfamiliar to them all, until in a hushed breath one of them murmured, "That belongs to me." In the dead of night, a call pierced through the darkness. The dispatch logged it as a routine report of trespassing. The voice on the other end belonged to Mason Wright, the leader of the hikers who had uncovered his own name engraved on the forsaken house. The responding officers anticipated nothing more than petty mischief, a jest among companions, but what awaited them defied logic. Detective Sarah Keller arrived as twilight draped the forest in shadows. Her flashlight cut through the obscurity, casting light upon the weathered facade of the dwelling. The names 27 in total stretched vertically down the eastern wall. Some had faded into obscurity with the passage of time, barely discernible against the weathered wood. Others remained sharp as if freshly carved. And at the bottom, Mason Wright, the incision still carrying remnants of newly sawn timber. "I've never set foot here before," Mason insisted, his breath materializing in wisps in the crisp air. "I cannot fathom how anyone would know my name." The inquiry commenced with scrutinizing the backgrounds of each listed name. The findings sent shivers down the spines of the detective team. Every name corresponded to an individual reported missing over the previous 4 decades. Some cases had grown cold while others remained active. Yet they all shared a disquieting similarity. The vanished individuals had been hiking alone. Forensic experts meticulously photographed each carving, documenting the varying depths, techniques, and weathering patterns. The oldest name, Rebecca Hansen, aligned with a missing persons case dating back 37 years. The records depicted a young woman who had ventured into these very woods and never returned, leaving behind only a solitary hiking boot beside a babbling stream. Detective Keller delved deep into Mason's account. His narrative remained unwavering. He bore no ties to the area beyond this particular hiking expedition with 4 college comrades. They had selected the trail at random, guided by an online suggestion. Nothing in his background linked him to any of the other names adorning the wall. The focus of the investigation shifted to Mason's companions. Emily Chen, the group's photographer, presented snapshots captured during their trek. Upon scrutinizing the images, analysts discerned a disconcerting anomaly. A blurred figure loomed in the background of 3 separate photographs. The silhouette resembled a tall, gaunt man, perpetually obscured by the foliage. "We encountered no one else on our journey," Emily asserted. "We would have remembered." Detective Keller sanctioned a search of the house's interior. The edifice appeared forsaken. Dust cloaked every surface. Furniture lay shattered and strewn about. Yet in the basement, officers unearthed a chilling tableau. Personal effects belonging to the missing hikers were meticulously arranged on wooden shelves. Watches, backpacks, cameras, wallets, each item labeled with a corresponding name from the exterior wall. The forensics team worked methodically, cataloging every object. Under ultraviolet light, aged bloodstains emerged on the concrete floor, evidence of years past, efforts made to cleanse the site. Ground-penetrating radar unveiled no subterranean bodies beneath the dwelling, yet cadaver dogs persistently alerted near the densest part of the wooded expanse behind the property. As the investigation deepened, Detective Keller observed peculiar behavior from Mason Wright. He began recounting anomalous incidents, whispers echoing beyond his abode, fresh footprints leading to his doorstep but vanishing beyond. Shadowy figures observed him from the street. The department assigned an officer to guard him, yet Mason's paranoia swelled. The breakthrough materialized when researchers unearthed land records concealed within county archives. The house had once belonged to a recluse by the name of Victor Blackwood. Locals seldom glimpsed him, recounting fleeting encounters with an unsettlingly tall, emaciated figure who shunned interaction. Blackwood had vanished without a trace 15 years prior, his disappearance left uninvestigated. Detective Keller secured a warrant to delve deeper into the encompassing forest. The search party uncovered a network of rudimentary hunting blinds, strategically positioned along frequented hiking trails. Within one such blind, they stumbled upon a journal brimming with meticulous observations, depictions of hikers, their pathways, gear, and routines. The handwriting matched samples from Victor Blackwood's scant existing documents. The journal entries escalated in dreadfulness over time. Initial pages detailed hunting tactics for wildlife. Subsequent entries portrayed humans as prey, their idiosyncrasies, weaknesses, and methodologies for their acquisition. The final entries meticulously recounted the stalking of each victim on the wall, complete with elaborate details on how he singled out his quarry. The manhunt for Blackwood spanned multiple jurisdictions. Helicopters outfitted with thermal imaging scoured the wilderness. Tactical teams combed every crevice and cavern, yet the suspect remained elusive. Mason Wright ceased answering calls. Officers dispatched to his residence found the entrance ajar, the chambers vacant, Upon his bedroom wall, freshly etched, resided a single sentence: "The hunter becomes the hunted." The quest for Mason persisted for weeks to no avail. Then, during a secondary sweep of Blackwood's abode, forensic technicians unearthed a ghastly revelation. Concealed behind a false partition in the basement, they unearthed a diminutive workshop housing woodworking tools, jars of wood preservatives, and a freshly hewn piece of timber bearing a novel name awaiting its placement on the exterior wall. Detective Keller recognized the name instantaneously. It belonged to the chief forensic analyst who had processed the house during the initial inquiry. The analyst had called in ill that morning, unreachable by phone. Authorities erected an unbroken surveillance perimeter around the residence. Camera systems captured every approach. Motion detectors stood sentry against intrusions. The trap was set. 3 nights later, sensors stirred an alert. Surveillance footage captured a figure emerging from the forest, impossibly tall and gaunt, moving with an eerie grace. The figure strode directly towards the house, seemingly indifferent to the surveillance. As tactical teams encircled, the cameras momentarily lost connectivity. Upon reconnection, the figure had evaporated into the night. To this day, the house remains under ceaseless watch. Mason Wright and the forensic analyst were never located. The investigation persists, with fresh resources allocated as similar vanishings manifest in other wooded realms. The names etched upon the wall have transcended into legend among law enforcers. Some officers refuse to utter them aloud, others skirt the case entirely. And local hikers now steer clear of the house, fearful that mere mention may consign their names to that grim register, the names unspoken. Story 20. In the stillness of the night, a mysterious package arrived, nestled in a plain envelope devoid of any return address. Within its confines lay a solitary brass key, its once shiny surface now weathered by the passage of time. The homeowner, a woman named Sarah Miller, examined it closely, feeling an inexplicable sense of familiarity wash over her. As she ventured to test the key in every lock within her home, a sense of unease crept upon her. The key refused to turn in any of them. It was a stranger to her abode, yet when she placed it gently on the coffee table, an unexpected sound resonated through the hallway, a solitary, haunting chime emitted from the old grandfather clock that had long been silenced, frozen in time. Puzzled and unsettled by this eerie occurrence, Sarah reported the strange event to the authorities, seeking answers to the enigma that had been delivered to her doorstep. Little did she know that this seemingly innocuous key would unfurl a chain of events that would shroud her tranquil suburban neighborhood in a cloak of darkness. Initially met with skepticism, the responding officer dismissed Sarah's concerns as a mere mix-up, a key mistakenly sent. However, Sarah's instincts whispered that something was amiss, a sinister undercurrent beneath the surface. Reluctantly, the officer accepted the key as evidence, a small action that would ripple into a vast and chilling investigation. The case file found its way to Detective Robert Harmon, a seasoned investigator with a keen intuition honed by years of delving into the shadows of human nature. The brass key sat innocuously on his desk, yet its presence carried an unsettling weight, a harbinger of secrets waiting to be unveiled. Background checks painted Sarah Miller as an ordinary woman with no skeletons in her closet, a retired teacher living a quiet life, a widow with grown children scattered across the country. No red flags in her past, no hints of deception in her present. She appeared to be exactly who she professed, an unwitting recipient of a cryptic gift. Forensic examinations yielded little beyond Sarah's touch on the key. The envelope divulged no clues, bearing only a nondescript postmark from a distant distribution center. The key itself, a common schlage, bore the marks of time and wear, hinting at a past obscured by shadows. A breakthrough materialized when Detective Harmon decided to delve deeper, running the key's unique pattern through the department's database. A cold case from years gone by resurfaced, linking the key to a storage unit where horrors had been concealed, blood-stained remnants, tools of cutting, and images of women, their identities shrouded in mystery. The original investigation had hit a dead end, lacking the evidence needed to unmask the perpetrator. But now the key had unlocked a door to the past, leading the investigators down a macabre path of discovery. The photographs of 5 women, 3 of whom had vanished without a trace, cast a chilling shadow over the case. Sarah, when confronted with the haunting images, recognized none of the faces staring back at her. With each passing day, her unease grew, prompting her to fortify her home with new locks and security measures. The unanswered question loomed large: why had this key found its way to her? As the investigation gathered momentum, a fresh analysis of the evidence breathed new life into the case. A partial DNA match led the investigators to Harold Jenkins, a former neighbor of Sarah's who had slipped away into the shadows years ago. His connection to the key sent shivers down their spines. Jenkins, a man of elusive past and enigmatic ways, had roamed the periphery of Sarah's life, leaving no discernible trace in his wake. The pieces of the puzzle began to coalesce: his proximity to Sarah, his hidden history, his insidious intentions slowly coming to light. The search for Jenkins intensified, revealing a trail of breadcrumbs deliberately erased: no renewals, no financial footprints, no digital echoes. His existence seemed to be a carefully crafted illusion, a facade masking a malevolent truth. The horror deepened as authorities unearthed a hidden chamber beneath a cabin linked to Jenkins, a chamber lined with rows of brass keys, each bearing a name and a date, a grim testament to lives interwoven with tragedy. The keys unveiled a chilling revelation of victims unknown, their stories lost to the annals of time. Beneath the cabin's floorboards lay the remnants of unspeakable acts, a graveyard of horrors concealed from the world. The excavation unfolded, unearthing the grim reality that had festered in the shadows for far too long. Sarah, now under constant protection, watched from the sidelines as the manhunt for Jenkins unfolded on a national scale. The moniker, the Keymaster, echoed through the media, a name synonymous with dread and despair. The community recoiled in disbelief, grappling with the realization that a predator had lurked among them, hidden in plain sight. The pursuit of Jenkins led to a final, harrowing confrontation, a standoff culminating in tragedy. In the desolate wilderness, the man behind the terror chose to meet his end rather than face justice. His parting words, etched in a journal, bore a chilling message for Sarah, a twisted tale of obsession and unseen observation. The investigation unveiled a staggering tally of victims, their stories etched in blood and pain. Families long haunted by uncertainty found closure in the harsh light of truth, a truth that bore the weight of unbearable loss. Sarah, forever changed by the brush with darkness, never returned to the sanctuary of her home, now tainted by the specter of Jenkins' malevolence. The once silent grandfather clock stood as a sentinel of the past, a harbinger of the horrors that had unfolded under its watchful gaze. The keys, silent witnesses to unspeakable atrocities, now rested in an evidence locker, a reminder of the fragility of safety, the thin veil separating the ordinary from the extraordinary. In the aftermath of tragedy, a community sought solace in the hope that such darkness would never again find a home in their midst. Story 21. The weathered envelope with its aged edges and a fresh stamp held a secret within. The detective, Sarah Morgan, unfolded it with caution, revealing a single sheet of paper bearing a message typed in haste. "I am sorry for what I did." The paper felt damp, carrying a faint scent of iron that lingered in the air. A reddish smear along the bottom edge caught their attention, a stain not of ink but of human blood. Detective Morgan, with practiced precision, secured the letter in an evidence bag, mindful of the significance it held. The forensics team confirmed her suspicions. The blood matched DNA from an unsolved case, the tragic murder of young journalist Rebecca Warren. Rebecca had been found in her apartment, a victim of multiple stab wounds, her work scattered around her, hinting at a story gone wrong. Despite exhaustive efforts, the case had grown cold until this mysterious letter arrived at the Homicide Division, a cryptic message from the past. The sender left few traces, only smudges hinting at gloved hands. The postmark, however, offered a glimmer of hope, a lead to follow. Gathering her team in the briefing room, Detective Morgan presented the letter at the heart of their investigation. "This changes everything," she announced, the weight of the unsolved case heavy in the room. Detective James Chen, her steadfast partner, raised a counterpoint, suggesting the letter could be a clever ruse, a theatrical ploy to mislead them. The unique typewriter patterns led the forensics team on a path to a bygone model, a rare find with a haunting legacy. As they delved deeper into Rebecca's life, they uncovered her relentless pursuit of truth, her dedication to uncovering corruption. Her latest assignment, entangled with a wealthy family's secrets, hinted at motives for her tragic end. Interviews with those close to Rebecca unveiled whispers of shadows following her, unseen dangers lurking in the darkness. A second letter arrived, echoing the first with its cryptic message and chilling content. The investigation led them to the grand mansion of the deceased patriarch, a place steeped in opulence and deception. The eldest son, Richard, exuded a polished facade, his secrets hidden behind a veil of propriety. Clues emerged, linking him to the crime through a web of deceit and betrayal. The youngest daughter, Eleanor, held a key to the truth, her stationery revealing a connection that unraveled the carefully constructed facade. The hidden room, with its damning evidence, painted a portrait of guilt and manipulation. The intertwining threads of Richard and Michael's collusion came to light, a sinister plot exposed through financial transactions and damning recordings. The courtroom became a stage for justice, where the weight of guilt bore down on the accused. Richard's denial crumbled in the face of overwhelming evidence, his fate sealed by the echoes of his own words captured on tape. As the trial concluded, justice prevailed, bringing closure to Rebecca's grieving parents and a lesson to all in the power of guilt and redemption. The blood-stained letters, now silent witnesses to a tale of deceit and regret, stood as a reminder that even the most carefully laid plans can unravel under the weight of a guilty conscience. Rebecca Warren's story became a beacon in detective training, a testament to the timeless truth that the shadows of the past can never truly be erased. Story 22. The aged apartment exuded a sense of history, its walls holding secrets whispered through time. The heating system let out a deep, rumbling groan, the pipes rattling in a familiar chorus. It was all part of the building's character, or so she believed, until the night she heard it, a voice, faint yet unmistakable, weaving through the vents like a ghostly thread. It wasn't the typical background noise of neighbors going about their lives. It was a soft, haunting whisper calling out her name. Intrigued and unnerved, she leaned closer, pressing her ear against the metal grate, her heart quickening in her chest. A sudden rush of cold air brushed against her cheek, followed by a gentle, almost playful declaration, "I know you can hear me." Detective Morgan Shaw stood in the dimly lit apartment, a sense of unease settling over her as she surveyed the scene before her. The room was empty, save for the remnants of a life abruptly halted. The forensics team moved with precision, capturing every detail with their cameras, the flashes illuminating the shadows that clung to the walls. The victim, Alina Reeves, had vanished without a trace, her absence unnoticed until a noxious odor permeated the building. What they uncovered within the labyrinthine ventilation system defied logic. Officer Patel recited the details from his notepad, recounting Alina's claims of hearing voices through the vents, pleas that had fallen on deaf ears, with building management attributing it to the quirks of an old structure. Shaw knelt by the vent, her eyes tracing the deep gouges etched around its edges, signs of a desperate struggle to break free. Fingernails, raw and frantic, had clawed at the metal from within an attempt at escape that ended in silence. Alina had been a beloved figure, a teacher known for her kindness and green thumb, her absence casting a shadow over the community she had nurtured. Her apartment told a story of a life interrupted, a neatly made bed, a forgotten coffee mug in the sink, a chair positioned beneath the vent as if waiting for a visitor that never arrived. As the investigation unfolded, unsettling revelations came to light. Fibers from Alina's clothing entwined in the vent grating, a foreign fingerprint on the inside of the cover, and haunting audio recordings retrieved from her phone. Alone in her car, rain tapping a melancholic rhythm on the roof, Shaw listened to the spectral conversations captured in the darkness of Alina's home. The chilling exchange between a frightened woman and an unseen presence sent shivers down her spine. The history of the building painted a macabre portrait. Previous tenants had fled, driven by unseen forces, whispers that echoed through the walls. Harold Weber, the enigmatic superintendent, held the keys to every door, his composed facade cracking under Shaw's scrutiny. A hidden passage behind a loose tile unveiled a hidden world within the building's structure, a realm of shadows where someone had dwelled, unseen and unheard. Weber's meticulously kept records, stored on his computer, revealed a twisted obsession with those he watched from the shadows. Audio files, photographs, and journals chronicled his macabre dance with his victims, a predatory waltz conducted in the darkness. A storage unit unveiled a trove of mementos, a shrine to his twisted connections with those he had ensnared. Captured in the dead of night, Weber's serene demeanor belied the darkness that lurked within him. His words carried a chilling certainty, a belief in a malevolent entity that spoke through him, a conduit for the building's secrets. Alina's fate, suffocated in the metallic embrace of the ventilation system, was a grim testament to the horrors that had unfolded within the building's walls. As the trial concluded, Weber's facade crumbled, revealing a man consumed by his delusions, a puppet dancing to the tune of unseen forces. The jury's verdict echoed through the courtroom, sealing his fate as a harbinger of terror. Yet, as he was escorted away, a haunting smile played on his lips, a promise that his whispers would linger long after his confinement. The apartment building now stands as a monument to the shadows that dwell within its walls. Despite attempts to erase the stains of the past, echoes of voices linger in the vents, whispers that defy explanation. The residents, wary of the building's dark legacy, listen to the groans of the heating system, the rattling of pipes, seeking solace in the mundane explanations they offer. But deep down, they know the building remembers, and the whispers never truly fade into silence. Story 23, the Polaroid lay nestled among a trove of memories, capturing a birthday celebration frozen in time. Faces beamed with joy, candles flickering innocently in the background. But when Sarah Winters unearthed the old photos from her mother's attic, a chilling discovery awaited. Amidst the familiar faces, a subtle presence lingered in the shadows. A man, a stranger, standing just beyond the radiant glow of the candles, his features obscured by darkness. No one recognized him, yet in each photo he drew closer, an unsettling progression that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. The collection, labeled Memories, should have been a comforting relic of happier days. Instead, it unraveled a haunting mystery that defied logic. In the first photo, he was a mere silhouette on the periphery, a silent observer during her childhood birthday party. As the snapshots unfolded, he insidiously crept closer, moving from the fringes to the heart of the gatherings, unnoticed by all but the lens capturing the scene. With a trembling voice, Sarah reached out to her father, seeking answers to the enigmatic figure haunting their family history. His initial disbelief gave way to uneasy recognition as he too failed to place the mysterious man in the photos. Detective Marcus Reed, a seasoned investigator, delved into the enigma laid before him, rain tapping against the precinct windows like a somber melody. As Sarah laid out the evidence before him, the detective's scrutiny deepened. The figure's calculated progression through the photos painted a sinister narrative, a phantom presence weaving through cherished memories. Despite exhaustive inquiries, no one could recall the man's presence at the gatherings. Facial recognition software faltered, his identity veiled with unsettling precision. Yet the mystery only deepened as Sarah uncovered more photos, each unveiling the shadowy figure lurking in the background of different family events. A computer specialist unraveled the obscured details, revealing telltale signs: a scar, a ring, a reflection that hinted at a darker truth concealed within the shadows. A breakthrough came with the revelation of dental records linking the figure to Robert Keller, a long-missing maintenance worker tied to decades-old child abductions. The pieces fell into place, connecting the phantom in the photos to a chilling history of unsolved disappearances that had haunted the region for years. As authorities unearthed grim evidence from Keller's past, Sarah grappled with the weight of a revelation that shattered the illusion of safety within her family's cherished memories. The detective's call brought news of a breakthrough, but the closure it offered was tainted by the grim reality of lives lost and innocence stolen. In the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by the damning photos, Sarah pondered the chilling truth they unveiled. The shadowy figure, once a spectral presence in the background, now stood exposed in the harsh light of justice. Through the lens of time, he had evaded detection, a malevolent force hidden in plain sight, preying on unsuspecting families. The box of memories became a repository of darkness, a testament to the unseen dangers that lurked within the confines of captured moments. As Sarah closed the lid on the haunting past, she knew that some mysteries were meant to be uncovered, even if the revelations they brought were more chilling than the shadows that danced across the faded photographs. Story 24. The new homeowners found it peculiar the way the old intercom crackled in the dead of night, a relic of a bygone era, revamped but left to fade into obscurity. One evening, driven by a twinge of curiosity, the husband pressed the button. A faint whisper crackled through the speaker, sending shivers down his spine. "Why did you come back?" Startled, he recoiled, hands trembling. His wife, lingering behind him, murmured softly, "I never said that." Nestled amidst ancient oak trees, the Victorian manor exuded an aura of mystery, its worn façade concealing a modernized interior. Daniel and Meredith Parker had acquired the property at an unexpectedly affordable price, despite the real estate agent's uneasy demeanor during the showing. The intercom system, a charmingly vintage feature connecting all rooms, had captivated the history-loving couple. Detective Sarah Reeves pulled up to the property, the gravel beneath her unmarked vehicle's tires whispering a quiet greeting. The call had hinted at a possible break-in, but the inflection in the dispatcher's voice hinted at a deeper tale. Daniel Parker, a tall figure with a pallid complexion, welcomed her at the entrance, the dim porch light emphasizing his unease. It all began with the intercom, he recounted, leading Detective Reeves into the grand foyer. First just static, then whispers, and eventually full sentences. My wife thought I was imagining things until she heard it too. In the living room, Meredith sat stiffly on an antique sofa, her hands clutching a steaming mug left untouched. We uncovered something hidden behind the wall, she disclosed abruptly. Daniel wanted to expand the kitchen pantry, and when he tore down the drywall, her voice wavered. Concealed behind the wall, wrapped in decaying plastic, was a small leather-bound journal. Detective Reeves donned gloves before delicately flipping through its brittle pages. The script, eloquent yet frantic, belonged to a woman named Alina, the presumed previous owner. The entries chronicled her mounting suspicion that her husband, Vincent, harbored ill intentions towards her. The last entry dates back 30 years, Daniel clarified. After that, silence. The previous owners mentioned they purchased the house from an elderly man who had moved to a retirement community. Further investigation unveiled that Vincent and Alina Blackwood had indeed once owned the house. Records indicated that Vincent had sold the property shortly after Alina allegedly departed. No divorce proceedings had been initiated, no change of address, no financial activities under Alina's name post the final journal entry. Detective Reeves mobilized a team to meticulously scrutinize the property. Ground-penetrating radar exposed anomalies beneath the garden shed's concrete foundation. As investigators breached the aged concrete, the truth unfurled in the form of human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the skeleton belonged to a woman in her 40s, displaying signs of blunt force trauma to the skull. Among the remains lay a gold wedding band inscribed with the words, "To Alina, my eternal love." The case against Vincent Blackwood swiftly accrued evidence. Now elderly and residing in a care facility, he comprehended the gravity of the charges levied against him. Confronted with the proof, his response sent chills down even the seasoned detective's spine. "She wouldn't cease her chatter," Vincent uttered, his voice eerily composed. "Always prattling through that cursed intercom, monitoring me, interrogating me. I disconnected it, but she reconnected it herself. Insisted on always being able to reach me, regardless of my location in the house." His vacant gaze met theirs. I craved silence. During his confession, Vincent divulged how he meticulously crafted the narrative of Alina abandoning him, even dispatching postcards to neighbors from various locales, inscribed in forged penmanship. For years following, he resided in the house, treading daily over the concrete concealing his wife's remains. The trial concluded swiftly, with Vincent pleading guilty to murder. The presiding judge remarked upon the premeditated nature of the crime and the decades-long web of deceit that ensued. Unable to endure the weight of its sinister past, Daniel and Meredith eventually sold the house. Before departing, they held a solemn memorial for Alina in the now-restored garden, post the investigation. The intercom system was dismantled during renovations by the subsequent owners. Workers reported hearing static and whispers during the removal process, attributing it to interference from their tools. Detective Reeves revisited the Blackwood case file one final time before its archival. As she sealed the manila folder, she pondered how the house itself had seemingly transcended time to unveil its hidden truth. Justice had at last caught up with Vincent Blackwood, courtesy of Alina's ingenuity in making herself heard. Among local law enforcement, the case became known as the house that answered back. Occasionally, as Detective Reeves drove past the property on her way home, she'd slow down, the window cracked open slightly, attuned to whispers carried on the breeze. Story 25. The ancient house had stood silent and empty for countless years, a relic of forgotten memories and untold secrets. Whispers from the neighbors hinted that no soul had dwelled within its walls since the young woman vanished without a trace. The arrival of new tenants stirred the stagnant air, unveiling a chilling mystery that had long been shrouded in darkness. As they ventured inside, a sense of unease crept over them, for they discovered the bedroom tightly sealed from within. With effort, they forced open the stubborn door, revealing a scene frozen in time. The room exhaled a heavy breath of neglect, the atmosphere thick with the weight of neglect and time. Yet amidst the stillness, something felt amiss. The bed lay neatly made, the mirror polished to a gleam. A lone candle stood as a silent sentinel, its wax reduced to a mere whisper of its former self, frozen in time like tears turned to ice. And there on the desk, a notebook lay open, its pages adorned with fresh ink that seemed to glisten in the dim light. Detective Morgan sifted through the pages, each stroke of the pen bearing the mark of Elise Winters, a young woman of 26 who had vanished into the night, leaving behind a haunting trail of words etched in ink. Her meticulous handwriting danced across the pages until the final entry, where the ink pressed deeper, revealing a sense of urgency and fear. "I know he's watching me tonight," the final words echoed off the walls. "The same car circles like a vulture. I've reached out for aid, but my cries fall on deaf ears. If fate should befall me, know that it was no happenstance." The notebook was carefully placed into an evidence bag, sealing away the echoes of a voice long gone. The room hummed with a hushed tension, a blend of dust and an elusive chemical scent that lingered like a ghostly whisper. The landlord, a specter of unease, lingered in the doorway, his face drained of color. "I swear we combed every corner before offering it up for habitation," his voice trembled. "That door should never have been locked." Elise, once a diligent paralegal at Harriman and Associates, a prestigious entity entwined in corporate shadows, had unraveled a tangled web of deceit in the days leading to her disappearance. Her colleagues spoke of late hours, of secrets unearthed in the depths of Westridge's clandestine dealings. Photographs captured her essence, auburn locks framing serious eyes, a facade of professionalism that masked a simmering unease. The pieces of the puzzle seemed too neat, too precise, for her vanishing act to be mere chance. The bedroom held no answers, no traces of violence or struggle. It stood frozen in time, a portrait of a life interrupted, a story left incomplete. The candle on the desk stood as a silent witness, its unscented wax a testament to forgotten moments. Forensic experts combed the room, unearthing fragments of the past in the form of aged fingerprints. An intriguing absence lingered, the doorknob wiped clean, the windows devoid of a trace. The search led them to a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard, revealing a key and a flash drive. The key unlocked a cryptic safe deposit box, concealing a trove of incriminating evidence linking Westridge Pharmaceuticals to a web of corruption. Audio recordings whispered of manipulated data, of truths concealed beneath layers of deceit. Elise's voice intertwined with that of Vincent Harriman, a man of power and shadows. The truth unfurled like a dark tapestry, revealing the sinister dance between greed and deception that had claimed lives in its wake. Neuropax, the tainted beacon of hope, harbored secrets that shattered lives, secrets that Elise had dared to unearth. Investigations wove a tapestry of betrayal as Harriman's facade crumbled under the weight of evidence. A trail of blood, microscopic yet damning, led to his doorstep, painting a portrait of guilt that time could not wash away. The mystery of the locked room unraveled in a dance of shadows and light as security footage unveiled a chilling truth. Harriman's figure slipped into the night, a phantom in the rain, vanishing into the depths of the house without a trace. A hidden passage, a forgotten tunnel, whispered of secrets long buried beneath the earth. In the heart of the bedroom closet, a portal to darkness beckoned, connecting the past to the present in a silent dance of revelation. Harriman's arrest marked the end of a chapter stained in blood and betrayal. His protests of innocence crumbled beneath the weight of Elise's unspoken testimony, captured in a moment of terror that echoed through time. The courtroom bore witness to justice served, to a truth unveiled in shadows. Elise's mother stood tall, her voice a beacon of defiance against the darkness that had claimed her daughter. The room once locked now stood as a testament to courage and sacrifice. The house, a silent sentinel of forgotten tales, remained untouched by the hands of time. Its secrets whispered in the night, a haunting melody that echoed through the streets. The light in the upstairs window flickered, a ghostly reminder of a woman who had dared to defy the shadows. Justice found its way to Elise Winters, not in life but in the legacy she left behind. The room she never truly left became her final testament, a silent witness to the darkness that lurked within the hearts of men. And as the house stood in silence, its walls whispered of a truth that could not be erased. Story 26. The tale begins in a costume shop on the verge of closure, where old treasures awaited new owners. Amidst the dusty shelves, a woman's hand reached out and grasped a mask, its delicate features both enchanting and eerily lifelike. As she placed it on the counter, the cashier hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "That's not ours," he muttered, a hint of fear in his voice. Perplexed, the woman glanced at the mask, only to find it devoid of any identifying tag. With a nonchalant shrug, she decided to bring it home with her. That fateful night, a soft, rustling sound stirred her from her slumber, a whisper of fabric shifting through the darkness. Startled, she turned to her nightstand, where the mask now sat, facing her with an unsettling presence. The woman known as Catherine Reed was later discovered by her concerned neighbor. The front door stood ajar, inviting the gentle morning light to pierce the shadows within. What awaited inside was a scene that would perplex investigators for years to come. Catherine lay lifeless on her bedroom floor, the mysterious mask nowhere to be found. Detective Morgan arrived at the scene, where forensics worked diligently to capture every detail. The rhythmic click of shutters accompanied the hushed voices of the investigative team. "No signs of forced entry," noted an officer as he jotted down observations. The detective's keen eyes scanned the room, absorbing each subtle nuance. A partially open drawer, a lipstick-stained water glass, a facade of normalcy shattered by the presence of a life abruptly ended. The medical examiner, his expression grave, knelt beside Catherine's still form. "Cause of death unclear at first glance," he murmured. "No visible wounds, no signs of struggle." Gesturing towards her face, he pointed out the frozen mask of terror etched upon her features. The detective, crouching beside him, whispered softly. Something frightened her to her very core. Catherine had led a quiet existence as an art appraiser, renowned for her discerning eye and unwavering dedication to authenticity. Colleagues spoke of her keen ability to detect even the subtlest of discrepancies. She could spot a forgery from a mile away, reminisced her boss during questioning. The detective pondered whether this very talent had inadvertently sealed her tragic fate. Footage from the costume shop unearthed a puzzling revelation. The cashier's baffled reaction to the mask was captured on tape, prompting further inquiry. The shop owner, visibly distressed, revealed the mask's sudden appearance during a clearance sale, its origins shrouded in mystery. "We never stocked such an item," he confessed, a tremor of anxiety in his voice. Pressed for details, he reluctantly divulged unsettling truths regarding items procured from a deceased collector's estate sale, where peculiar occurrences were not uncommon. A breakthrough emerged when microscopic fibers were discovered clutched within Catherine's fingertips. She grasped onto something, the lab technician explained. These fibers are unlike any modern material, composed of human hair intertwined with an unidentified organic substance defying identification. The investigation unraveled a web of similar deaths spanning decades, each victim linked by the acquisition of an enigmatic mask, their faces etched with unbridled terror. A retired detective, once involved in a parallel case, shared a chilling revelation. Across a dimly lit room, he slid a weathered file towards the current investigator. Written within each mask, concealed behind its lining, were ancient symbols, he disclosed. A scholar posited their connection to a ritual entailing the transference of souls. A pivotal moment arose when a hidden journal was unearthed within Catherine's residence, detailing her descent into a realm of malevolent forces. Her final entry chronicled a sense of being watched, a looming presence within her home, and her grim realization of the mask's sinister purpose. The detective meticulously pieced together the evidence, the enigmatic fibers, Catherine's harrowing findings, and the pattern of inexplicable deaths. The cause of Catherine's demise was ultimately determined to be cardiac arrest induced by sheer terror. What unfathomable horror could prompt such a fatal reaction? The investigation took a macabre turn when surveillance footage unveiled a figure departing Catherine's abode, adorned with what appeared to be the elusive mask. Mirroring Catherine's gait but moving with an unnatural stiffness, the figure left a trail of dread in its wake. Despite a search for the missing mask, it remained elusive, resurfacing months later in a vintage shop across the nation, already sold to an unknown buyer. The case remained unresolved, shrouded in an aura of mystery. The detective safeguarded Catherine's journal as a testament to a truth too bizarre for official records. In the stillness of night, she would awaken with a jolt, a sensation of unseen eyes upon her. Securing her surroundings, she fought to suppress thoughts of the malevolent mask, destined to seek out its next unwitting host. An ancient cycle, spanning centuries, of a vessel hungry for souls, perpetuating an unending legacy of terror. The mask lingered in the shadows, awaiting its inevitable rediscovery. And when that moment arrived, a new victim would awaken to the haunting presence of empty eye sockets fixed upon them, a sinister entity yearning for the essence that dwelled behind their gaze. Story 27, The Tale Unveiled. The new residents initially dismissed it as mere peeling wallpaper, a minor imperfection in their quaint Victorian-era home. But as Michael and Sarah Klein delicately removed the layers, a chilling narrative began to unfold. Inked onto the exposed wall, repeated endlessly, was a single name: Alina Winters. The name danced across the surface in a frantic, uneven script, hauntingly unfamiliar yet eerily significant. Intrigued by the mysterious discovery, the couple delved deeper into the enigma that lay hidden within their new abode. The name did not belong to any known previous occupants, nor did it surface in any official documents. However, a cursory online search unearthed a solitary outcome: a decades-old missing persons case, the details mirroring the woman who had sold them the house. The elegant Margaret Cavendish, with her silver-streaked dark locks, had passed on the property to Michael and Sarah with a sense of urgency, citing a cross-country relocation. Little did they know that beneath the charming facade of their bargain purchase lay a tale of intrigue and tragedy waiting to be unraveled. It all began innocuously enough, with a water stain marring the master bedroom's floral wallpaper. Sarah's keen eye caught the yellowish blemish, prompting them to investigate further. With a gentle touch, Michael exposed a hidden layer beneath the damaged paper, setting off a chain of revelations. Peeling back the wallpaper, they journeyed through time, uncovering layers of outdated patterns until they stumbled upon the unexpected writing etched upon the third layer. Dark ink against faded beige paper spelled out the name that would consume their thoughts, Alina Winters, repeated endlessly in a desperate plea for remembrance. As Sarah traced the name with trembling fingers, a shiver of unease swept through them. The night brought no solace as Michael delved into property records, seeking answers to the inexplicable connection between the haunting name and their seemingly serene home. Their search led them to an archived article detailing Alina Winters' mysterious disappearance 30 years prior. The photograph depicted a young woman bearing a striking resemblance to Margaret Cavendish, deepening the enigma that enveloped them. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, the Kleins embarked on a relentless quest for truth, unearthing startling revelations with each passing day. Their renovation plans took a backseat as they delved into the past, piecing together a puzzle fraught with deception and hidden identities. The retired detective's recollection of Alina's cold case shed light on the baffling circumstances surrounding her vanishing. The mention of a mysterious Margaret Cavendish stirred dormant memories, propelling the investigation into unforeseen territories. Forensics teams descended upon their home, transforming it into a hub of scrutiny and discovery. The intricately inscribed wall became a focal point of analysis, each stroke of ink carrying echoes of a past shrouded in darkness. A hidden compartment beneath the bedroom floorboards revealed a trove of secrets, linking Alina Winters to a web of deceit spun by a troubled mind. The revelation of multiple identities intertwined with a chilling history of obsession sent shockwaves through their once tranquil sanctuary. An unsettling truth emerged as DNA evidence tied Alina Winters to the hidden remains unearthed in their backyard. The fragmented pieces of the puzzle began to coalesce, painting a portrait of a disturbed soul seeking refuge in a labyrinth of falsehoods. Rebecca Eldridge, the elusive figure behind the veils of deception, was unmasked as the orchestrator of a heinous crime decades in the making. Her fractured psyche, embodied by the myriad personas she adopted, stood as a testament to a mind consumed by delusion and despair. As the sun set on their once idyllic home, Michael and Sarah bore witness to the culmination of a harrowing saga. The walls that had sheltered their dreams now whispered tales of anguish and betrayal, forever marking their residence as a nexus of intrigue and tragedy. In the quiet of the night, as shadows danced upon the walls, the echoes of Alina Winters' name lingered, a haunting reminder of a life lost and a soul forever entwined with the fabric of their reality. And as sleep beckoned, enveloping them in its soothing embrace, the mysteries of the past gently faded into the realm of dreams, where secrets lie dormant and the truth remains veiled in the mists of time.